The Santa Barbara School Board of Education for Tuesday, September 8th. We are returning from closed session, and we will open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do have Spanish translation available.
We have Esperanza Villegas with us tonight.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Esperanza Villegas y esta noche estoy aquí para traducir. Si alguno de ustedes necesita ayuda, me puede encontrar en la parte trasera de esta sala.
We also have headsets available for the hearing impaired. You can contact a staff member on the side if that is needed. Introductions, proclamations, presentations, or recognitions.
Is this Amy? Well, we do have a presentation tonight. Amy Ranzohoff just made it to class. She's an illustrious royal at San Marcos High School, and all schools are now in session. We asked student Amy Ranzohoff to give us a glimpse of how things are going at San Marcos High School.
Yeah.
Amy, it's good to have you with us.
Sorry I'm late. Attendance match went later than I thought. I thought I had time, but no. Well, anyway, I'm Amy Ranzohoff. I'm the representative from San Marcos this year. And I just have a little update on what's going on so far this school year. It's been a great start. We have 488 new members for our class of 2013. Freshman orientation was a great success thanks to our Link Crew. Link Crew is a group that we've been having for about 2 years, and they're given 10 hours of special training. They're seniors at our high school to sort of help the freshmen ease into the school year and ease their anxiety about starting the new year at high school, and give advice about how to succeed academically and to help them find a way to break out of their comfort zone. And this is the second year we've had Link Crew at freshman orientation. 2 teachers were trained 2 years ago at a special Link Crew conference, but 1 teacher was let go, so we only have 1 who has the special training. And the rest of the funding for this program comes from actually our own students from the ASB funds. And the students and the ASB at San Marcos realized the importance of helping the freshmen get off to a good school start for their freshman year. And we are also very excited to have back to school night tomorrow night. The festivities start at 6 p.m. in the auditorium, while classroom visitations begin at 6:30. Next week, the seniors will start their annual magazine sales, which fundraises to help supplement the cost of prom and senior activities. Also on September 25th, we have our first home varsity football game of the school year versus Weneme at Valley Stadium. And immediately following the game, we will have our first dance of the year in the quad, the PGP or post-game party, which we're all looking forward to. And our homecoming is sooner than we all think. It's October 3rd. We're having it at the Earl Warren Showgrounds this year. And our theme for this year's homecoming is Bollywood. And they've been planning it for months now. We're all really excited. And over 1,000 students will attend. And our final item to report on that you might not be aware of, this year's graduating class of seniors, the class of 2010, has been affectionately called the Golden Class of San Marcos High School. The reason? This will be the 50th graduating class in San Marcos High School's existence. And the school had its first graduating class in 1961. We will be planning something special for this year's class at graduation next June. It hasn't been announced yet, but that's word on the street. And that's it. Sorry again I'm late, but thank you.
It was actually perfect timing, so thank you so much. Great news from San Marcos.
Thank you.
And now, is that it for?
That's it for presentations
Okay,
tonight. Thank you.
superintendent's report.
Good. I'd like to report, first of all, on our enrollment. You know that we collect numbers and follow those numbers very closely the first 3 weeks of school so that we can make adjustments. Now, each October 1st, there is an official enrollment date. It's called the state CBEDS enrollment date for California Basic Educational Data System. While we are not at that point yet, that'll still be a month away, We do monitor the first 10 days of our school year, which gives us a snapshot on how this year's enrollments are stacking up. In our elementary district, we're checking the enrollment from last Friday as compared to the official Seabeds Day of last year, and we are up about 1% over last year. In the secondary district, last Friday's enrollment was 9,824 students, and that is down about 1% over last year. So elementary district is now at 5,791, secondary district at 9,824, 1% increase in the elementary district, 1% decrease in the secondary district. Today, President Obama gave an address to students across the nation, encouraging them to focus on school, hard work, and making the most of their education. I'm hopeful that families will watch it on tonight's news and continue to dialogue on the importance of getting the most out of each school day, because that was really what the message was about, students being responsible for their own future. Yesterday, the text of the message was posted on the White House website, and it was clear that the President's remarks did not include the political references that some parents and community members had feared, like on issues about health care, although the complaints have not abated. A copy was provided to all of our principals, and I encourage them to have their students listen to the President's speech, of course, permitting parents to opt out their child if they did have concerns. Most students did see the speech. On Friday, here's a save the date. On Friday, October 9, Dos Pueblos High School will dedicate O'Leary Stadium in honor of the late legendary athletic director, Scott O'Leary. The dedication will take place prior to the start of the varsity football game against Rio Mesa High School. So it would be earlier in the evening, 4, 5, 6 o'clock, something like that. But we only have a date so far. We'll get you the time when we do have that. In preparation for flu season, I'd like you to see these posters, because we're sending these posters around to all of the schools. In preparation for flu season, our Office of Administrative Services and Communications, our school nurses, and the Santa Barbara County Department of Public Health are working together to get the message out to staff and students about staying healthy during the flu season. Flyers have been produced in English and Spanish, and posters are being distributed to the classrooms across the district. I believe there are some others just as flyers on the side table as well. The board brief. My office regularly issues a report to the board called the board brief. It is a collection of reports and news items on school and district matters. A copy of the August 28 board brief is on display in the reception area, or it can be provided through my office. I would like to highlight just two of the items in the last board brief from August 28. First, we had our new revisions to the district's transfer policies. Those revisions are available in English and Spanish. They're available in the board brief in the reception area. They're also available on the district website. So if there are any questions about what the new policy is, people can take a look and see directly. Secondly, a report on retirees and economic benefits was provided. We are actually receiving an economic benefit from the retirees leaving, and the certificated staff we are replacing with these positions. The total savings shown in the memo you saw was almost $400,000. With very few exceptions, the 84 people hired in this last round, especially in temporary positions, are not retirees. There were a couple of sections that were provided by retirees. But, the bottom line on this was that we hire people who will do the best job and are the best qualified for the position, and salary is not a part of the consideration. In fact, to consider the salary and consider how cheaply we can get people would be an unfair labor practice. And that's it for tonight's superintendent's report. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Herron?
I'd like to make two comments. One, thank you very much for the notice to the principals encouraging the students to watch the president. Every day I walk in, every meeting I walk into this building and there's a banner, if you didn't notice it. You miss school, you miss out, make school a daily habit. That's the message we send, and for the president to give the same message I think it accomplishes so much. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
And thanks for the heads-up notice on the posting.
And the other is, for more information on the flu, there's on the website, there's also a lot of information about the flu and what can be done. So I would urge anybody to go to the website homepage and look at all the information there. The copies of the flyers are there, but also there's more depth too. So I'd encourage them to read the website. Use the website. It's got a lot of information.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Moving on to item C2, the announcement of closed session action. We do have one item that we need to report out. On item B1, conference with legal counsel, existing litigation. It was moved by Herron, seconded by Cordero, to approve the interim partial settlement agreement in case number 2009040547, involving payment of $3,000 for an independent educational evaluation to be conducted on behalf of the student. That motion passed 3-0 with Noel and Deacon absent. I do want to mention at this time that Mrs. Deacon is out this evening because of a family medical emergency, and Dr. Noel is out this evening because he's having trouble getting back from the East Coast. Item C3, public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I think we have one, Shireen
Katapush?
Katapush. There's no agenda item number. Is it public comment from Fighting Back? Okay.
Thank you. So I'm Shireen Katapush, I know most of you, and I'm the Director for Youth Services for Fighting Back and the Council, and I'm here just to say how pleased we are to be partnering with you again this year. This is our 18th year with Youth Service Specialists serving students in the secondary schools, and also I wanted to tell you about a couple of upcoming dates, but first I want to introduce our one and only new Youth Service Specialist to you. Her name is Kimberly Hazelwood, and she's at Goleta Valley. Would you like to say a few words?
Well, I'm Kimberly Hazelwood, and I just want to mention that I have been so warmly received at Goleta Valley Junior High, and I'm super excited to be working with the nonprofit and the school district. I've never done a partnership like that before, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Thank you.
Kimberly, along with many of our other YSSs, will be participating in the United Way's Day of Caring, which is on the 16th. They're going to be doing a school beautification project at Goleta Valley, but students from the other schools will be engaging in other community service on the 16th, so that's something you should know. Also, on the 26th, we're having a leadership training for our Club Live and Friday Night Live students, so they can learn community service and leadership skills and really lead the campaigns on their campuses this year to promote a drug and alcohol-free lifestyle. On the 18th of October, we're going to be having our Red Ribbon Poster Contest reception. I don't know if any of you have ever attended that, but it's at the courthouse in the mural room, and that's where we give the awards for the students K through 8 who participate in our Red Ribbon Poster Contest, and we make the calendar out of their winning artwork. That's all done with funds from asset forfeiture. So it's a terrific partnership that we have with you and with law enforcement in the community. Anyway, it's just terrific. They come in their Sunday best, and they get their little savings bonds and their awards, and it's a wonderful afternoon, so we'll be sure to send you invitations to that. And then later in October, we have our Summit for Danny, which is our fundraiser for the Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center for youth. And we'll be celebrating Red Ribbon Week at the end of October. So lots of good things happening in the next 2 months, and we thank you for the ongoing good partnership. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Katapush.
May I just double check, is the Day of Caring this Saturday, September 19, Day of Caring? It is. Okay.
You just said the 16th, but the 19th, okay, to be clear. Thank you.
The whole community will be there.
At this time, we will move on to item C4, which is the acceptance of donations.
Move to accept with appreciation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It carries 3-0. And then the consent agenda. Are there any items that members would like to pull?
I'd like to pull 3.
Yes. Which,
That's it.
oh, sorry, D3?
D3. I'm sorry. Yes, D3.
Any others, Mr. Herron? D13. Is there a motion to approve the rest?
Move to approve the remainder of the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That carries 3-0. And we will return to those two items that were pulled at the end of the meeting. Now we are on to the action agenda. First on the action agenda is the approval of end-of-year financial statement unaudited actuals for fiscal year 2008, 2009. The issue with this is that it turns out that board members and the public did not actually get the entire unaudited actuals document. So my suggestion at this time is that we push this item to the end of the action agenda, but turn into a conference item instead. And that will give us an opportunity to hopefully get copies of this document put on the side table, so at least as a conference item, people can have a chance to look at it, and we'll have a chance to look at it. We can take the break before we go to it. But we won't take action on it because we haven't had a chance to look at it. And we will have to call, I'm afraid, a special meeting because this needs to get to the county by September 15th. So at this time, I'm just trying to take a look at the other three items.
What did we, Madam Chair, what did we get?
What we got, well, Mr. Smith, you can explain.
You received all the funds. There's just some supplemental documents in the back that, like the technical checklist and things of that nature that weren't included. And there might have been, some details like the attendance detail and the revenue limit detail. But the substantive material is in front of you, but we need to have you approve the whole thing. This just came to our attention right now. We're under the impression that these bound copies went out to everybody, and apparently they did not.
So what I'm going to suggest that we do is that we take item E2 and E4 at this time, and then take a break and get copies made of item E1. And then, depending on how long that takes, we may jump. I don't want to go too far ahead of 8:05 for the approval of pilot parking fee, because there may be people from the community that want to speak. So we'll either do E3 then or E1 then, depending on, after the break, depending on how the time goes. So let's move at this time to item E2, which is the approval of resolution number 2009/10-03, delegation of governing board powers, duties, authorizing cash and budget transfers per Education Code 35-161, and updated authorized signature forms.
And this will be presented by Eric Smith, our Deputy Superintendent for Business Services.
Generally, we place this on consent. It always seems to get pulled, so we put it right on action. So in my mind, it's really a consent agenda item. Obviously, this delegates the powers of the board to certain people within the organization with respect to purchasing authority and signature authority on certain documents.
Any questions on it?
Move for approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That passes 3-0. Well, you didn't help us burn 10 minutes there, Mr. Smith. Let's move on to item E4, which is the approval of declaration of need for fully qualified educators for the 2009-10 school year.
I believe Dr. Chris Robertson's going to make this presentation.
Yes, on purpose, because we may have people that want to speak to that.
I would love to make this presentation, but the supporting documents are missing. And so you don't have anything to look at in terms of the resolution or the names that were supposed to be attached. I've looked in Ann's office, in Mimi's area, and I cannot find.
All right. We will skip that one as well.
And defer it to the next meeting if I can, please.
Okay, we will, if we do end up having a special meeting based on the budget, on the unaudited actuals, we'll tie that in as well. Okay?
I can have it ready.
All right, at this point, we will go ahead and take a 15-minute break so that we can get copies of the unaudited actuals, at least a few copies for the public.
Want to do the action items? Or?
Those,
I mean, the consent calendar?
we already,
The two that.
oh, we could go ahead and do that. All right, let's jump ahead. We are jumping all the way ahead to item G, return to consent items designated for discussion. So,
And
let's,
copies are being made now, by the way.
of the unaudited actuals, that's hard to say. So that takes us to D3, and that was Mrs. Cordero.
Yes, and my question is, I think, a very simple one, it just was confusing to me, and that is on the third page in, no, sorry, take that back. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth page in, the part that has the heading Darfur Contracting Act certification. It suggests that we should have initialed 1, 2, or 3. And none of those are initialed, and I assume that we would be 1, but I don't know. Is there a reason why it's not initialed?
I believe it should be initialed 1, and I'm going to defer to our purchasing managers here. I don't believe we have and have not had within the previous 3 years business activities or other operations outside of the United States. So we would initial 1.
Okay. Would those would normally be initialed when they come
One of
to us?
them would
Yeah.
be initialed,
Okay.
and it would probably almost always be 1.
Okay. Then I will move to approve with that correction.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0. And then the other one was item D13. Mr. Herron.
I had some questions on this, but I wonder if it might be possible just to move this to the next meeting so we have a full board. I have some questions about what I thought was done at the meeting that aren't here, but maybe the whole board should be in that discussion.
Well,
Do you want to surface the questions
Yes.
so
Yeah,
that we
well,
can
I-
research them?
For some reason, I left the meeting thinking we had made closing the achievement gap part of a very specific message on the desire to close the achievement gap. And I don't see that in here. I thought we had come to the consensus that it's not enough just to keep saying we want to increase our achievement, but we want to close that gap. And I forget, I thought you, Mr. Cordero, I thought you were involved in that discussion.
we had the discussion, but I don't think that we put it, I don't remember us putting into language in the focus goals for 0910.
Well, what I saw in this revision that I thought was the attempt to capture that, and it's not precisely that, is the last item that says, discuss underrepresentation of Latino students in the district GATE program and investigate alternative models. Because I had specifically said that we need to have results in that area, but we didn't determine what we thought the results should be, or we didn't have that full discussion. So I thought, okay, discuss that is is what our focus goal is for this year, but,
I'd like
but I
time to
agree that
yeah.
maybe a more specific goal about closing the achievement gap.
I
Well,
thought we
should
were
have come
tired of the
forward.
constant statement, we want to close, we want increasing achievement, but every year the gap stays the same. And I thought we definitively said, hey, we want to do something different. We want to put a mandate that it be closed in some way. I'd like time to look at the CD or
Yeah,
DVD.
look at that again, because I don't, you know, that to me would be something that we might put under the student
Right.
achievement goals as opposed to the,
I thought
what we're
I-
doing to support the goals.
I
But
thought
yeah.
it was under student achievement.
Yep,
And it-
absolutely. You can look at the DVD and we can bring this back.
And then-
That's fine.
Thank you.
All right, now at this point, we will go ahead and take a 15-minute break so that we can get those unaudited actuals with no objection from the board. We will recess. And go back to item E1, the unaudited actuals. Again, we will not take action on this tonight. We will be having a special board meeting on Thursday at 6 p.m. in order to take action on this item. But
And I did check the calendar. We have Dos Pueblos open, or back to school night that night, but that's the only conflict. I mean, there's a conflict every night.
Every night.
And so it doesn't matter which night, we'll find some conflict.
Okay. So, Dr. Sarvis,
Well, this will be presented by Eric Smith, our Deputy Superintendent for Business Services.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis. As the board knows, we're required to file unaudited actuals with the County Office of Education by September 15th of each year. The unaudited actuals are pursuant to Ed Code Section 42100, and they basically identified the amount of revenue we received in 1 year and the amount of expenditures that we were expensed in 1 year. The unaudited actuals are inclusive of both the general fund, unrestricted and restricted, as well as all the other special revenue funds that comprise the district's budgets. A couple of highlights with respect to the unaudited actuals. One of the things we look at is we look at what our estimated actuals at budget compared against what our unaudited actuals look like, especially with respect to our unrestricted reserve. We did a little bit better in the unrestricted ending balance than we showed in the estimated actuals, and that was primarily because one of the things we did at the end, year-end close, is we actually did a sweep of restricted ending balance. At the second interim, we showed that revenue actually being receipted in 9/10, so it shows in our multi-year projections and actually reduces our overall contribution in 9/10. But basically, we ended up, as part of our year-end transactions, actually doing it in 8/9. So it had the net effect of increasing our unrestricted ending balance. A portion of that was related to that. Another portion was related to the fact that we actually did our estimated actuals in June. The revenue limit deficit, which was specified under the May revise, was higher than what was actually used, or actually we were supposed to use, based on the state's adopted budget as of July 28th. So the combination of both of those factors actually ended up having an ending balance a little bit higher than what we thought or what we estimated in June. So we swung basically from about 6.21% in estimated actuals to about 8.29% in unaudited real actuals, and a large portion of that was the restricted ending balance sweep, roughly $2 million. So that's probably the most significant issue with respect to the unrestricted general fund. I should state that the majority of those extra dollars will go right back to the state, since we have to deal with the $250 per ADA one-time hit. We're currently in the process of putting together a plan that we'll be bringing back to the board for board approval on how we arrive at getting enough money to pay them back. I should point out that in that restricted ending balance sweep, the lion's share of that was in the secondary district. So trying to come up with the $1 million that we need in the elementary is becoming especially problematic, but we have some ideas and we're putting together a plan, and we hope to have it in front of the board by late September. I think a couple of highlights that you should probably look at with respect to the unaudited actuals on page 2 of the general fund, which I'm looking for page numbers in here, but I don't see any. If you look at the components of the ending balance, you can see the 3% that we're required to have by law, and then you can see the unappropriated amount above and beyond that.
Mr. Smith, would it be possible to put that up on the screen?
Good.
Yes, it's like 4N.
I have March 10th, 2009. Is that
No.
No, you have my second interim.
That's better.
There we go.
That's where it went.
They all start looking together. If you page about 4N, it'll say page 2, and on the top it says unrestricted and restricted expenditures by object.
I think for us, it's page 4 of 190.
So page 4 of 190. And so what I wanted to point out was, if you look at line E, which is the net increase or decrease in ending fund balance, you can see that a little over $2 million, mine's highlighted in the, actually, that's not helping my eyesight, but in any event, that's, and you can see how that actually rolls down into the ending balance, and we end up with about, in an unrestricted and restricted ending balance of about 13 million. But if you look in the first column, column A, you can see the X, I can't see those numbers, which is our 3%, and then the unappropriate amount, which is down there in Object 9790. And the combination of both of those gets you to about the 8.29%. So if you took those two figures and added them and divided them into our total expenditures and other outgo, you'd be at about 8.29% on the unrestricted side. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, then if you flip to the next page, one of the things that we're always concerned about is our cash position. And Object 9110 is what shows what our cash is. And you can see that in 9110 combined, we have about $6.5 million at year end. You never want to be negative cash at year end, and you can see that about 4 million X is in the unrestricted side, and the remainder of it is on the restricted side. So as we move through the next few pages, that's just actually the revenue and expense detail. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions about that. The next fund is the Charter School Special Revenue Fund. There is really nothing newsworthy in that fund. But when we get to the next fund, Child Development Fund, we've got a little bit of bad news in this presentation and a little bit of good news. Child Development Fund's in trouble. And if, right here, if you look at Fund Form 12, past the charter schools, and you go to Form 12.
Page 28 of 190.
Right. I wonder if this would be, I wonder if this bound version here is numbered.
It's page 1
There we go.
or 28 of 190.
Let's do it that way. And if we look at the 910 unaudited actuals column, when you see that excess or deficiency of revenue, you see that negative $323,000 there? Well, what you can see is that basically they've got a structural deficit that just we're having to cover. And you can see that interfund transfer of $268,000. We've met with Child Development. They've made a number of expenditure reductions, and we put them on a plan to repay this over 2 years. But, you know, a number of things are happening in Child Development that basically are problematic. One, I don't think when state revenue started to decline like we saw in the unrestricted general fund, we started making the appropriate adjustments. And I think what happened here is it kind of snowballed, and now they're making the adjustments. So we're actually underwriting them at year end here. We told them we're not going to do this on a perpetual basis, that the board has a policy of restricted funds being self-contained. And actually I got to credit Meg. She wasn't going to let them off on their deficit. I was willing to say, well, hey, we'll help you out on this one-time basis. But she said, no, you're paying us back. And so, so we put them on their own fiscal recovery plan. And over the next 2 years, we'll believe they will be totally whole. So the next series of pages, after you get through the Child Development Fund, is a little bit of good news, which I think might be the first time in recent history the Cafeteria Fund ends in the black. So when we look at the same situation here, and we go to Form 13, and if we look over to page, it'd be easier if I would have highlighted this one, page 38 of 190, you can see then that same calculation where you see an excess deficiency of revenues, you can see that they're up by about 129,000 there. So you have a structural surplus. And as you can see, even if you pull out their stores, and a portion of that is the ending balance from the Harding cafeteria, which is about 70,000. If you pull out both, there's still 59,000 to the black. And I don't know when the last time that occurred was. So that's really a credit to Nancy and the fine job she's doing. Like I said, I don't know when the last time the cafeteria fund was in the black. So congratulations.
Oh, I see you there in the back, Ms. Weiss. Thank you very much.
The rest of the funds are really, you know, the building funds, capital facilities for developer fees, general obligation bond, pretty much uneventful because there's not a whole lot of activity in those funds right now. It was really the operational funds that we're concerned with. I would want to bring to the attention of the board that in Fund 67, if I can find that, which is where we consolidate some of our self-insurance. We have a vestige of a old workers' compensation self-funded program, and there's liquidity sitting in there from when the district left being self-funded and went to SISC in fiscal year 04-05. That will probably form a portion of our plan to pay back the state. So I'm just bringing that to your attention right now since that seems appropriate. We're starting to put the skeletal framework together of this plan, and this will be one of the building blocks. We think there's probably $500,000 sitting there, and I'll get into more detail when I make the presentation on that, but the board should be aware of that. So between what we've been able to sweep from the restricted ending balance, a couple of other things we're working on right now, some fund equity in this fund, we're putting together a plan. So the remainder of the documents are really just the supplementals, average daily attendance detail. There's a schedule on community day schools, indirect cost worksheet, a lottery worksheet. It's pretty much perfunctory. The substantive material is in the funds, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have about that.
Board members, any questions at this time? No? Right. Well, thank you for the presentation. We will be coming back to this in 2 days. It is a special meeting, so that requires 24-hour notice. We'll get this up on the website and make sure that, that the complete package is on the website for everybody to look at in the public, okay?
We will do.
And we'll come back to that. At this time, we will move on to item E3, approval of pilot parking fee proposal for major sporting and community events.
And Eric Smith will make this presentation as well.
Last spring, when the board was examining budget reductions, including revenue augmentations, one of the things that came to the forefront was looking at whether we could leverage some of our assets to generate revenue. I believe one of the board members brought forth the proposal for charging for events parking. We didn't think that was something that we'd have the ability to do internally, and we thought that we'd need a whole year to study it. Once we started rolling on some of the other things we were doing, such as parent pay, transportation, and things like that, we realized, hey, well, I'm not sure we have the organizational capacity, but what if we look to an outside vendor to carry this out? There was an outside vendor actually working locally. We contacted them, met with them, told them of our needs, and basically what we were interested in. They put together a proposal. The proposal's for the board, and I'm not sure Signature is going to be here tonight, but I know that Brian Tangway and myself and Meg Jate, who've all been in the meetings with them, we probably can answer some of the questions relative to the process we went through in talking to Signature Parking and about what they would and would not do. When we started looking at this, we thought it would probably be best to do it on a pilot basis and basically let the board have the latitude to decide if they want to do everything, do a portion of it, do maybe just the district office parking lot, you know, give you wide latitude to decide what you thought might be in the best interest of the district. We've been collecting data relative to attendance at the athletic facilities in terms of what they would generate in terms of attendance, what we think the impact on parking would be, and we have some ideas relative to revenue generation. Lastly, if this is something the board would want to embark on, you know, we think it would be appropriate, especially with regard to athletic events, to probably return some of the net profit back to the athletic programs. I haven't talked to the AD specifically about this, but I was thinking probably in the neighborhood of 15%. So we'd be more than happy to answer any questions about the proposal. Once again, it is something that was included as a budget reduction item before 9:10 that we deferred until 10:11. So here it is, a little bit early, but we recognize we have a number of things that we're going to have to wrestle with the rest of the year. And since we've already made progress here, we figured we'd bring it back to the board for your consideration.
Board members, I think we have public comment on this. Shall we hear public comment and then go into more detail about our questions? How many speakers do we have?
3.
Okay.
Jennifer Miller, followed by Norm Clevenger, followed by, I'm sorry, okay. By Denise Fellows.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Miller. I've been a neighbor of Santa Barbara High for over 17 years. I heard from a friend who teaches at the school that the district wants to start charging for parking for events. When she asked her students what they thought about it, they told her that they and their parents wouldn't pay, that they just park in the streets. Extra cars parked in our streets due to public events is not my main concern. We're used to that as we are neighbors of the bowl. My concerns are what the influx of people directly into the neighborhood brings: more traffic, more trash, more noise, and possibly vandalism. As neighbors, we've been well considered by the bowl. They have extra police handling traffic control with flares. They direct traffic. They send out a cleanup crew each morning after shows. They canvass the entire neighborhood. And also, when patrons of the bowl have caused damage in the neighborhood, the bowl's paid for those repairs. So we've been very spoiled. When I first heard about the proposed parking fees, I called my contact at Santa Barbara High. That's Patty's in the principal's office. She told me what she usually tells me when I call: once it's off campus, we can't do anything. And I've been told this when there's fighting or pot smoking or anything. She says, if it's not on campus, we can't help you. She did suggest, however, that I call the school district, and I called and talked to Eric Smith, and he called me back quickly. I appreciate that. He's the one who told me the agenda, this would be on the agenda tonight. He also told me that the district wants to be a good neighbor, so I'm sure hoping that's the case. I've spoke with Sergeant Rivas at the traffic division of the police department, and he told me that public streets and anybody can park there, and that the school doesn't have any obligation for traffic control or extra security. And just as disturbances happens, if they do, we can just call 911. I also spoke with Officer Naganuma. He's the special events officer at the police department, and he concurred with Sergeant Rivas. And he did say there were already some contract policemen at football games that's part of CIF, so that they are around, and maybe after games they could come out into the neighborhood. He did agree, though, if patrons are parking in the neighborhood and problems begin to arise, that the school would need to come back later to remedy the situation. During my conversation with him, we talked about the price to park and how that will probably have the biggest effect on all of this. He said that if he goes somewhere and parking's a couple of bucks, his wife will tell him, don't be cheap, just pay, we'll park. However, if the rate is perceived as too high, people will not pay. As he said, laziness wins. So if it's seemed a good price, people will pay to park. And I see in the attachment here this evening that Signature Parking Services has proposed charging $20 per hour per employee, and they recommend a minimum of 5 employees, plus $3,600 for supplies. So it sounds like the parking rates are going to be pretty high to ensure that the school makes some profit after Signature has made profits. I'm fully aware that the school district is low on cash, and that's why there's a proposal to charge for parking. However, as a good neighbor and as a compassionate citizen, you can't just do something on your property and not consider the effects that that has on those around you.
20 seconds, please.
Thank you. Maybe I'm just being a cranky neighbor and none of this will come to pass. However, life experience tells me differently. And if I am right and the board does nothing but to raise a few dollars for the district and for Signature parking at the expense of the surrounding neighborhood, I'll be disappointed, because right now you have the chance to do this right. Thank you.
Norm Clevenger, followed by Denise Fellows.
Thank you. President Parker, members of the board, Superintendent Sarvis, I wanted to address this paid parking proposal from a high school perspective. I'm using my own school as an example, but I've talked to the principals of the other 2 high schools, and we have the same issues and concerns. Concern number 1, I don't see this as much monetary gain. On San Marcos campus, we have 470 parking spots. I know at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening, before the parking people would get there, 150 of those spots are taken up by people that are working the game, administration, football players, people in the band, people in the cheerleaders, marquettes, kids that are there. Some kids never leave. They just go across the street to Vaughn's for dinner and stay there. So there's going to be approximately 320 spots that they can collect revenue on. If we assume it's $5 a piece, that's $1,600 for the month, minus whatever the night, minus whatever you have to pay for I'm assuming somewhere around $800 or $900, so it's maybe a $700 profit. Number two, the burden on family budgets. Right now, a family of four coming to a game at San Marcos High School, it's probably close to $50 for tickets to get in and food. And to add another $5 to these families, I think is something that we probably don't want to do. Thirdly, now, a high school image in our community. I know that no matter how well the district announces and advertises the new pay for parking system, it's going to be greeted by a lot of complaints and scorn by our parents and for sure almost all of our students. And as I described my last issue of concern, I think you're also going to find, as you've already heard, some complaints from the surrounding community and neighborhood. My biggest issue here is safety. San Marcos High School, we have separate parking for visitors and home. We have separate entrances for visitor and home. We have separate seating for visitor and home. Not that our kids are ever going to do anything, but it's always good precaution to keep the home and visitor, students and fans on separate sides. And what we're doing now is we're putting them all in the same community, in the neighborhood. Knowing my students, as I do, they're going to veer off as soon as they get to campus, and they're going to park in the community. They're not going to park in the parking lot, no matter probably anything that you charge. So the paid program now then would put all of these students together, visiting and away in the same place, walking to and from the event and coming back. And I'm a little concerned that after the game, especially if it's a close game, having both visitor and away students in the community in a place that can't really be supervised by us or the sheriff's department that's on campus, helping people exit it's an issue that is very much a concern for us. So safety is number one.
About 10 seconds.
So I think in closing, I'd like you to keep these things in mind as you make a decision about what to do about paid parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Denise Fellows.
Good evening. I just heard about this issue this afternoon. I'm a parent at Dos Pueblos High School and heavily involved with the Parent-Teacher Association. I don't represent them this evening. But I do want to say not many things in life are free for our students. They already pay to get into the game. They are there to express their school spirit and support their team. In light of our economic times, we really want to encourage our students to participate in healthy activities, to have a great time with their friends in a supervised setting where many teachers, administrators, and parents are also at the game. The parents will park in the paid area, but the students will not. As Principal Clevenger is concerned with their safety, I too am concerned with the safety of the students as they come and go from the game. They will not be parking in the same area as the parents. They'll be out in the neighborhood, and it really is not the safest of situations for our students. I'm also concerned about being good neighbors to the businesses in our community. In San Marcos, you have Vaughn Shopping Center that could very easily become a ready parking lot for the students. At Dos Pueblos, we already have enough traffic issues out there. We really find that it's difficult to get traffic to move through our area due to the configuration of the streets and the lights and all of that, and then to push people out into the neighborhood is really not going to help the situation anymore. I'm also concerned that there's been no communication with the neighbors, that you make this decision this year, you've had no workshops or invitations for the neighbors to come in and offer you their concerns and their opinions. Of course, it's been on your agenda. I have yet to see it in the newspaper or in other places, and I pretty much follow what's going on in town, and I'm very concerned that we remain good neighbors to our neighbors surrounding our high schools. I really think this needs more thought and more planning, and I would ask that you really consider asking the opinion of both the parents, the teachers, the administrators, and also the community surrounding the high schools. I appreciate that this is a tough year, and we all want our high schools to do as well as they can, but for the return on the dollar, I really think this is not the wisest decision, and I would ask that you would carefully consider this and look into it further before approving this measure. Thank you.
All right, board members, I think I can, are there any more on?
No, she's.
Okay, at this point, I think I can probably ask the very first question that we all want to know, which is what are you thinking of charging, and what is the estimated income from it?
Well, I mean, obviously, Signature doesn't recommend charging less than $5. They said that's kind of the citywide standard. So, you know, that's what we would estimate. You know, basically, relative to revenue estimates, you know, our target was 25,000. I don't think we're going to hit it, you know, based on the things I've heard. But I think probably, depending on what occurs with other sporting events and whether we do something with some of our other items, such as like this parking lot, we might be getting closer to $20,000. But I would say conservatively, we're probably more around 15.
Board members, questions? Mr. Herron?
The one question that came out in the email correspondence I've had and some of the talks tonight was this concept that the Santa Barbara Bowl actually hires staff to go out and clean up and direct traffic, and there's a cost associated with that. Did we give any thought to that at all?
Well, I think one of the things you got to take into consideration is the Santa Barbara Bowl has 4,500 parking spaces. If you look at Santa Barbara High, it's about 500. So when you look at the economies of scale and what you're going to generate in revenue, anytime you have that kinds of economies of scale, you're going to be able to take on more overhead. So, I mean, we could look at something like that, but you're on a dollar for dollar basis, you're diminishing your return.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, you probably recall I wasn't in favor of this when we first, when it was first proposed, because something people haven't said, but that I'm also concerned about, is whether it would have an effect on attendance at the sporting events. The fact that people aren't. One of the speakers did mention that there's something about the schools being a place where people can come, and especially where students feel like they can come to what the school that they attend without having to pay just to park on the campus. So I was not inclined to support this when it was proposed originally, and I've heard even more arguments that I think would make me feel like if we're talking about $15,000 and it generates so much ill will in the surrounding neighborhoods and probably with the students as well, and likely with their families, to me it's not I mean, the cost benefit on that doesn't seem to be worth it. I'd rather just sort of drop this topic at this point and see if we can find something that actually would result in a greater return for us.
Any other questions, Mr. Herron?
I can't honestly remember how I felt about this at the time, but I do know a related topic was charging students to park in the lot with parking passes, and my comments at that time were, all we're going to do is push the students into the neighborhood, and I didn't think that was right. So following that same logic, I don't know if I said that about this at the time, but this idea of going into the neighborhoods with traffic and people, it does bother me too.
What I am really ready to do and not drop, however, is the idea of having them come in to use the district office parking lot for special events.
Could I say one thing relative to Board Member Herron's comments? I believe, and maybe the site administrators from the high schools can contradict me if I'm incorrect, but I think with the exception of Santa Barbara High School, the ASBs are charging students, both at San Marcos and Dos Pueblos, without board authority.
For parking?
No, that's not correct. No, I mean Santa Barbara and San Marcos, not DP. DP is the only one that's not charging. Is that correct? Yes.
So I'm sorry.
I'm just telling you this
ASB is charging for parking.
For student parking.
For student parking in the parking lots.
That's correct.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
telling you, you have an onion here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Mr. Herron.
I think my comments also related to putting another charge on top of that, was going to put it into a price that would push people maybe off campus.
Yeah.
But
I just wanted to be clear that the board was aware that at least two of them are charging.
Well-
And if they're going to continue to charge, I think they need to do it with board authority, because I don't believe there's any board authority backing it up.
And I would absolutely agree with that, because the use of our parking lots,
Principals, that should be a simple fundraising request.
okay. So this is on for action, so we could at least take action on having a pilot program for the district office with signature parking. Is anybody willing to make a motion on that?
And just for clarification, I believe we have 125 spaces between this lot and that lot, just so you know that.
That was going to be my question. I wonder how many will want to park here for any event, but the one below, that used to be a farmer's market parking lot. I used to park there every Saturday.
I believe they're both farmers market parking lots.
This one too?
Yeah, and then you'll also have special events, you know, like Fiesta and Solstice, that they will probably fill.
Yes, I have to say, I find this parking lot quite convenient for some of these events, so that would, that would be a good thing to charge for, I think. So is anybody willing to make a motion?
Well, I'm interested in which events are we talking about? So how many days out of the year do we think this would be? What's the amount that we think we would likely gain from that? Because I'm still unclear how much of what if I couldn't see charging more than $5, especially for someone coming to the farmer's market.
Right.
And so I'm unclear how much of that we would see as a district once we pay signature.
I think signature, the overhead's going to be much less here than it would be at like a football game. I couldn't give you a calculation off the top of my head, but you know, let's say we had maximum utilization, you have 125 times 5. So
And we could,
Then whatever
this
their
could be a
labor is.
pilot program for
Sure.
several months, and we could just see if it's worth it or not.
Would we run into the same concerns that the other speakers raised about the impact on the surrounding neighborhoods?
Well, what I see now is if there's a special event, oftentimes the district actually locks off the parking lot, so nobody can come in here, period, like for Fiesta.
That's correct.
It's locked off. So this might actually mitigate
Okay.
parking issues.
Well, we also rent this parking lot to events across the street at Historical Society.
I'm sorry. I assume, maybe I'm wrong though, that when we rent it, that would be a higher rate and we would get the full return on that?
full return, I'm not sure I'm understanding you.
Meaning
We
they-
still have to pay signature to do, you know,
No.
supervision.
What I mean is now, without signature,
Oh, absolutely. but-
when we rent it out. Because I'm wondering, would a contract with signature preclude us from renting it out for special events that take place?
Well, I think we can structure the contract any way we want. If we want things specifically excluded, we could exclude them. The issue, I think, becomes supervision and enforcement, and that's the only reason you'd be actually hiring signature to do anything.
Mr. Herron?
I would move we authorize going forward with the school district parking lots, and leave it to Mr. Smith to work out the details.
Just the district administration, correct?
Yes.
Is that,
Can we put a time limit on that?
Yes.
I'd say, I don't know what's a reasonable time, 6
Well,
months?
we
Is
need to
6
have some
months?
special events come through. We have
Yeah, that's part of your problem, yeah.
Right,
the-
so there's the Christmas parade, what's happening in the spring? I mean, there's the farmers markets that would be looking at.
Right.
Then the next thing I can think of is solstice.
Right.
Right, so maybe just till I would kind of like it to run through Fiesta just to see if it's worth it. Although frankly, even if we just see if it happens for solstice, that will.
I guess my concern is that it seems like for the major events, it makes sense. So, for example, Fiesta, Solstice, those make sense. I'm more concerned about the routine events that, like the farmer's market, where to see what kind of impact that has. So I don't know.
Bring it back to 6 months for review.
Yeah, can we just bring it back in 6 months for a review, and if it,
Okay.
if it hasn't encountered any major problems, we can extend it to see those other.
All right, so Mr. Herron,
Yes.
you'll adjust your motion?
Yes.
So that it comes back in 6 months for review. And Mrs. Cordero?
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion on it? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That passes 3-0. We now move on.
And we will drop the charging at the high
Right.
schools.
At this time, yep. We now move on to item F1 on the conference agenda, which is the request to speak to the Board of Education regarding pesticide use at Santa Barbara School District schools.
I don't think it's we don't have any backup material.
And this is Estelle Foster.
don't. Yeah, it's,
Well, thank you, dear board members. Thank you, Dr. Sarvis, and thanks to Mimi Hall for arranging for this time for me to speak. She generously gave me 10 minutes, and it's going to take me that time to get through this, so thank you. You know, I'm Estelle Foster. I'm the executive director of PAC, which is Pesticide Awareness and Alternative Coalition. We're the people who have created over 40 parks toxic pesticide-free in Santa Barbara, and also we're a major force in the setting up of the now city-included advisory committee, the IPM advisory committee. So I know we're all here for the same reason, and that is our mutual concern for the health and safety of our children. So let me refer to my notes. The points that I want to make this evening are these, and these are some of the requests that we're going to make. A commitment to an organic approach rather than the use of toxic chemicals and pesticides on campus, student vulnerability and hazards, school board communication with the public, alternatives, and the EPA. So there are schools and municipalities and farmers across the country who just use constantly bait traps because of gophers and rodents of all types. So they use bait traps, they use other kinds of traps. So it's really just basically a commitment to either the organic approach or the pesticide approach. That's what we found. And I realize all the problems that have beset the schools with the squirrel problem. I know that you had some major situations with that. And I really appreciate the choices that you've made prior in trying to do everything else but use a rodenticide, which was used at Dos Pueblos and at San Marcos High Schools. So I appreciate your past choices, and I hope we can go back to those and add a few wonderful things to them. We have some ideas for that, and that is raptor boxes on campus. Owls and hawks just love to, feast on rodents of all types. Also, the county has a program for feral cats, which many of the community have been availing themselves of, and that's really great. The reason that, using raptor boxes is only a problem if there is residue of a rodenticide on campus, because an owl only has to eat 2 poisoned mice and they die. So we really have to, not only for our children, but for domestic and non-targeted wildlife, we really need to keep our campuses as clean and green, if you will, as possible. Well, we can all agree that everyone benefits when there's a real meaningful communication with the school board and the public with the school board. And the parents were very concerned when the rodenticide difasinon was applied on campus. It's a EPA classified highest toxicity, not to be used around children. It's very harmful when inhaled or there's skin contact or it's ingested. So that's a real problem. The parents were very frustrated, concerned, and even I got some emails of outrage in that there wasn't, in response to their communication asking for a meeting with the school board or a temporary halt or both, just to discuss it. What we got back were form letters, and they were very upset with that. So that's something that I think needs addressing, whether there's a liaison that's appointed, an ombudsman, a coordinator who can coordinate between the board, the public, the parents, the IPM advisory board, the facilities manager. That would really be wonderful. It would prevent this kind of thing from happening again. I just want to appreciate the people who are here, who were here to support this issue, and also those who couldn't be here because at this hour they were home caring for their children to make sure they did their homework and went to bed on time. Well, let me see. I think I'm ahead of myself. Do I get a B on this or A minus? Thank you very much. Who said that? Thank you very much. There isn't any magic bullet with rodenticides. Rodenticides are harmful. There isn't any magic bullet in the cleanup of the campus. It's an ongoing process. And as I said, we can use the raptor boxes, we can use the feral cats that the county has offered. And there's one other aspect, because rodents keep coming back wherever there's a food attractant. So I know that currently there's a cleanup after lunch. What I'd like to suggest is perhaps a student participation in a community service or a school service where there are cleanups several times a day for food and food wrappers. That would really, I think, make some kind of a deterrent. Well, difacinone, the rodenticide, was applied at these schools. As I mentioned, it's a bad actor classified by the EPA, not to be used around children because of the hundreds of accidental deaths that have occurred. The manufacturer states that non-corrosive gloves should be used while applying the rodenticide and that complete residual cleanup take place. There's just a bit of background I want to share with you regarding Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation. You know, there is a product called Rototrol, which is basically corn cobs and molasses, and it was used effectively by the Santa Barbara Department of Parks and Recreation until it was taken off the market for label reclassification. The Parks Department found that out when they tried to reorder. And that is something that could have been gotten by the board, by the district, if via an emergency waiver, via the DPA, the DPR, the Department of Pesticide Regulations under Section 18. So that is something that could have been done that was not done. I mean, I know it takes research to look into all these things, but that's what we're here for. We're here to protect our kids, and certainly the solution to a problem can't be worse than the problem itself. So, okay, at the very minimum, schools needed to have used bait stations. This is what was done when parks baited rodents, or squirrels, who were rodents, at Shoreline Park. They used the bait stations. behind fences, completely inaccessible to the public. I mean, unless someone wanted to climb over the fence, but that's what should have been done, we feel. They should have used bait stations. They should have used other, because after all, if a rodent became sluggish and then wandered off and wasn't picked up by the contractor or died off campus, one of the non-targeted wildlife would eat that rodent and die. So that's another aspect. And none of us, I don't think any of us, can really guarantee that every bit of that rat poison, if you will, has been cleaned up from campus. Because it was, I guess I forgot to mention, that it was spread by non-corrosive glove.
20 seconds.
Really? Around, is that my 10 minutes?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, around the squirrel holes. So it was done that way. So, all right, there's one other point here that I think is very salient, and that is that in 2008, the Environmental Protection Agency did a risk management program. 10 rodenticides were disallowed. Difasinon was one of them. Difasinon is only allowed at this moment to be used in bait stations. So what was done was completely out of compliance. I have to tell you.
We have a report on this coming up, so, and we have some public comment, so we'll have a lot more time to be talking about this.
Could I just say one more thing about it? And that is that IPM committees and consultants vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And I think it's just incumbent upon us to do our far-reaching due diligence. And thank you for this opportunity. And I have, may I give this to someone? I have copies for you. Okay, thank you.
And there's public comment?
One public comment, Carolyn Renard.
Well, I'm very glad to hear Ms. Foster's presentation and her concern. Completely independently of their organization, I have been trying to communicate with Dave Hetjonk about the use of the poison baits at the high school, on the high school fields. And for approximately a year, I haven't been able to get a straight answer from Mr. Hetjonk about why they didn't use the barn owl nesting box approach. I finally did my own research after I kept getting the runaround from Mr. Hetjonk. I emailed you copies of the emails with Mr. Hetjonk, so you all know what I'm talking about. And I did my own research and found out that actually most of the damage is being caused by ground squirrels, which operate during the day, whereas owls operate during the night. So barn owl boxes are probably not the best approach, but probably the best approach is the use of sulfur smoke bombs, which have to be done at a certain time of year when the soil is sort of moist and it's sort of labor intensive, but the smoke completely dissipates after the squirrel tunnels and gopher tunnels are inundated with it, and then it turns into a fertilizer, a harmless fertilizer. So I then asked Mr. Hetjonk, well, how about considering this? Because if you just did this in a preventive way, then you won't have to use the poison baits that are extremely toxic that our kids are being exposed to. Well, you know, I couldn't get Mr. Hetjonk to give me a straight answer on that either. I've emailed the board on my emails with Mr. Hetjonk, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then Mr. Hetjonk says, well, he's going to do a presentation to the board. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that's well and good that Mr. Hetjonk is doing a presentation to the board, but really I think the public deserves to be able to get answers to their specific reasonable questions and concerns about the use of pesticides instead of having Mr. Hetjonk having to come and do a presentation to the board, although I don't have a problem with that, but I think he should also answer questions from the public about why things aren't being considered. Then I asked him, well, who's on your IPM committee, your wonderful IPM committee? Well, it turns out that there's not really hardly anyone except perhaps one person who has experience with IPM. You know, what sort of an IPM committee is this? Then I asked him, well, why don't you have any experts on IPM on your IPM committee? Well, he won't answer that either. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on F1?
I think the rest are on F2.
All right, at this time, we will move on to item F2, report.
Well, it came IPM, and I'm sorry, IPM is sort of the title of the next one, but if you meant F1, but F2 is actually report on integrated pest management, which is IPM, I presume.
All right.
You're Mrs. Cobb?
Yes, I'm Mrs. Cobb. I just wanted to make a quick statement. I'm a parent of a 9th grader at Dos Pueblos, Caroline Whalen, and I just want to say as a parent, poison is never the answer for me and a school ground. I don't believe in using poisons to control pests. I believe in removing the source of food. That's what they're here for. And this is what I want taught to my children, let alone made an example by the people that are teaching my child. You know, there is a better way to do this, and there's natural controls, there's cleaning up the food that caused it in the first place. I know this is just a general statement, but it's very important to me that the school and the school board represent the behavior that I want taught to my child and that I want her to carry forward. You know, poison is always the easy way out. It kills squirrels. Therefore, it kills other things that come in contact with it. It's not the right way to handle this. So I'm just making a clear statement. Poison is not to be used on school grounds. Thank you.
James Smallwood? James Smallwood? Okay.
All right, we will move on to item F2, report on integrated pest management.
And Dave Hetnyuk is our Director of Facilities and Maintenance.
Thank you, Dr. Sarvis and board members. Integrated pest management, if you review the handouts, if I could just refer back to that a little bit, is a process by which steps are taken to deal with a pest. And integrated pest management is meant to use the least toxic method possible to rid the pests from the environment. So let's talk about the IPM process a little bit and what pests we typically have at our schools and what steps we've taken to deal with them. Some of the pests that we deal with are weeds, mice, rats, ants, gophers, cockroaches, squirrels, bees, wasps, and termites. Those are the common ones that we encounter. As you know from the printout, 10 years ago, the district had a long list of pesticides that were used. We've greatly reduced that list. And in your packet, you see a notice that goes out to parents every year at the beginning of the year. And that notice contains a list of pesticides that may be used during the year, and ask parents, if you want to be notified in advance if any of these pesticides are going to be used, fill out the form, send it into your school, and you'll be notified in advance. If anything that's on that list is going to be used, we notify everybody.
May I ask a question on that?
Sure, Mr.
As long as you're talking about that list, why aren't diphysanone and Rodentrol on that list?
Because we don't plan on using it on a routine basis. It's not something we would expect to be, it's not something we would expect to use as a part of normal IPM procedure.
So the possibility you might use it isn't.
Well, we had our old list was full of possibilities. And when we had meetings with parents, they said, well, you're using all these chemicals on our school. And I said, no, we're not. That's just a possibility. And the parents at the meetings I went to, the PTA meetings, said, well, you're sending the wrong message to our parents. If I look at this list, I expect you to be using that on a routine basis, and you're not doing that, so you're killing yourself with bad publicity by sending out the wrong message. The other good news is the system worked. Before diphysanone was used, every single parent at both high schools received a letter indicating that that was going to be used. So as far as communication with every single parent, that's what happened. But on the list, let's talk about bees and wasps. Bees and wasps, the only time we ever use a pesticide on bees and wasps is if it is an immediate threat to the students. Sometimes you'll get a swarm of bees, and it's not in an area where students can be. Well, hopefully the swarm will move on. But there are certain times when a swarm is inside the tile roof. For some reason, bees and wasps like to get into the tile roof area. We've had the comments of, well, I have a beekeeper who will remove any bees any place, any time. We always call the beekeepers, and the beekeepers basically say the same thing. They want to be able to wrap something around that hive and take it away. And if at all possible, we do that. If at all possible, we remove students away from the swarm. This is a school. It's not like a park, a city park. You don't always have a choice of where you want to be. And so short of canceling classes, emptying out part of a school when we don't have extra classrooms to send the students to, sometimes we will use a pesticide for an immediate threat of a bee or wasp swarm. And hopefully we can notify in advance. If it's an immediate threat, we notify the superintendent that we did not have time to give 72 hours notice. It was something that had to be taken care of immediately. The other thing on the list that I'm considering when the IPM committee meets is maybe taking off are the pesticides for termites. We've been able to successfully treat most termites with heat versus pesticides. And heat is our preferred method. It costs more. It's always our first choice. But sometimes you don't have that opportunity, and you need to protect the building. You know, you can only let the damage go so far, and now you have a structural issue. And so sometimes you do have to use a pesticide for that. The other pesticide on our list is Surflan. Surflan is a pre-emergent. And by this pre-emergent, I'm not talking about going out and spraying weeds like Roundup or something like that that a homeowner would do to kill weeds along a fence line or do some markings. Surflan as a pre-emergent is only used prior to applications of asphalt. And every time we do that, we ask the site, you know, these are the benefits, these are the risks. Talk to your school community and let us know whether you want us to use the Surflan or not use the Surflan. And so it's usually the principals, after contacting their parents and finding out what that particular school community wants. Do they want to deal with more weeds coming through the asphalt? Would they like to see the pre-emergent? We give those schools that choice via the principal. And so these are the pesticides that are on our list that routinely, or not routinely, but that we sparingly, very sparingly used. I'm not a fan of pesticides. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not a fan of pesticides. And I'm proud of this district with the reduction in pesticide use that they've gone through. And let me talk about a few things. Things like cockroaches. I can't tell you the number of calls I got this summer. We have cockroaches. Come and spray immediately from schools' sites. I said, no, that's not what we do in Santa Barbara School District. Here's the things you need to do. We talk about sticky traps. We talk about removal of food. We talk about cleaning up clutter. The same thing with ants. Ants are looking for either food or water. Gophers. As far as gophers, we've been successful with trapping gophers. At our elementary sites, our roving gardeners do the trapping. At our secondary sites, our site gardeners do the trapping. And we've been successful with trapping gophers. So, you know, the big problem that we have had for the last 7 years is squirrels. They've caused extensive damage. Have you known from previous presentations, some of you have been on the board for a while, we've had our principals, our athletic directors, our student athletes come up and talk about the condition of the fields, the injuries, and we reviewed the steps we've gone through to that point to control the pest. So yeah, there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to a city park and an athletic playing field. An athletic playing field, you're worried about injuries. In a classroom, you're worried about squirrels getting so aggressive that they're coming into the classroom and biting at students' toes. You have a choice not to go to Shoreline Park or Chase Palm Park. You don't really have a choice not to go to school and be in the classroom. And not every day is it conducive to shut the door, especially in times of heat. You want the door open, the windows open, you want air to travel through. And I noticed Mr. Clevenger was here. I emailed him one day and says, you know, look out your window, how many squirrels do you see? And he says, at least a dozen, right outside my window. And so that's just an example of the scope of the problem there. So let's talk a little bit about just squirrels, because I think all of our other pests are primarily under control using non-pesticide methods, including weeds. We don't use Roundup. We don't spray for weeds. We use weed whackers. We use manual pulling. We use fire. And we've been doing this for years, these methods. We've been reducing pesticides for years. At Dos Pueblos, and I'm not sure, I think it was around 2002, we hired a contractor to deal with the squirrel problem, mainly using the method of oxygen and propane, where you fill the burrow with oxygen and propane and explode it, and theoretically, the squirrels die in their burrows. Squirrels are kind of the opposite of gophers. Gophers are all individuals. They like to be apart. They're never together. Squirrels live in a den. They live together. So we had the contractor out at Dos Pueblos, and it sounded like a loud shotgun going off. We had complaints from neighbors calling the sheriff's department saying someone's shooting over at Dos Pueblos. It was effective in the burrow where the explosion took place, but if you sat there and watched the contractor as he made one explosion, all of the animals in the nearby burrows would run away. So you move over to the next burrow or hole to do an application, there's no squirrels in there. They're already gone. They've already been scared away. So when you hire a contractor, typically he's out there for 1 day, 2 days, and that's it. Well, you can't hop around and be effective like that in a short time frame, so there's a lot of times that you would need to have multiple visits for small areas. And again, your neighbors are complaining. Sounds like a large shotgun going off, to tell you the truth, for this. Then we had a former superintendent who lived near a school district that was doing the same thing, not our school district, and her son witnessed a squirrel that came out of a hole, and its tail was on fire, and he was traumatized by that, and I can see why. So we were asked to stop using that method, and we hadn't used that method since. In 2004, this is how long we've been working on this problem, 2004, both Dos Pueblos and San Marcos and their athletic directors came to us, the IPM committee, with the problem of student athletes being injured because we could not control the squirrel population and the squirrel holes. And it's not just the fields. Squirrels were burrowing under buildings, under sidewalks, under stairs. Especially at Dos Pueblos, we have expansive soils. When it rains, then the water gets in the squirrel holes. Soils expand, contract, and we have damage to, most of the damage to the track is due to the expansive soils out there and water getting in and out. So in 2005, we started trapping. Step one in the IPM process, okay? We're not doing anything toxic. We're not doing anything to hurt the environment, so we tried trapping. We had limited success with traps, mainly because people were destroying the traps. They didn't like the idea that we were out there trapping squirrels. Squirrels that were caught in traps were destroyed of what we consider to be humanely. Studies have been done by major universities, and the most humane way of euthanizing a squirrel is with carbon dioxide. And that's the method that's currently used up until today. At this time on our IPM committee, we had a couple people that I would consider knowledgeable about IPM practices. We had Karen Feeney and Jeff Cope. At the time, Jeff Cope was still with Santa Barbara City Parks and Recs, and we looked to them for a lot of guidance. In 2006, Jeff Cope said that the city had had good success with difascinine and recommended the school use either difascinine or Roadtrol as the next step in the IPM process. And the IPM committee talked about that. And I was a little bit hesitant. I said, you know what, I think that's too big of a step. So I suggested that we contact Phil Boyce with Urban Ag Ecology and asked Phil what he thought the proper next step would be. And at that point, Phil reviewed where we'd been with the process, and he recommended what we call the giant gas bombs that the previous speaker was talking about, which are a pesticide, a Class 2 pesticide. And so following the trapping, that was the next step that we tried. That usually has to be in the spring. When the soil is wet is the time that is most effective. So we tried those. We didn't have that much luck. We had another person who's knowledgeable about IPM practices, Greg Chittick, write an email to the superintendent that says, I've been following what you've been doing, and I completely agree that these are the right steps. You've tried trapping, now you're trying the gas, and if that doesn't work, then difascinine. Even though the agenda item for that time said difascinine or road trawl was not available at that time, so difascinine was used. After the gopher gas was used. The gopher gas was not that effective, and in 2007, we asked the board for permission to use difascinine and road trawl, and that's when the road trawl wasn't used. It wasn't available. Difascinine was used. Like I say, this was part of the IPM process. We have Karen Feeney, Jeff Cope, Greg Chittick all saying, you've done your due diligence now, but just make sure that when you do this, you use proper methods to control exposure to other animals or other people, and we did that. But in 2007, nobody was satisfied with the results of using difascinine, and we sure didn't want to go to fumitoxin or something like that. I mean, a lot of school districts use that, but our IPM committee and myself wouldn't even consider it. So we went back to review why didn't the difascinine work. And we met with Phil Boyce and we tried to find out what did we do wrong. And basically what we did in 2007 was we gave a contract to a contractor because we don't use any pesticides ourselves with district employees. We're not licensed to use or apply any pesticides. All of our pesticide use is done through licensed contractors who have the proper license and the proper knowledge to do the application. And basically what we found out that was the district, and I'll take partial responsibility for this, didn't do a good job of going out ahead of time, scoping the area, finding out where the major boroughs were, didn't monitor the contractor close enough as far as areas that we were using. We stayed an extraordinary care away from any buildings. Didn't want to get close to any buildings, especially when we have a couple child care facilities at San Marcos. Even though it's during summertime, there's still, and you don't want to even get close to the building, much less never inside an enclosure where those children would play. And so in 2007, we did use difascinine, and it wasn't that effective. Again, squirrel population ballooned back. Again, we get the calls from the principals. We get the calls from the athletic directors. We get the call from the assistant principals. Do something. We're being overrun with squirrels. And as the board knows from certain presentations, you've seen the parade of athletes come through. You talk about, notifying everybody of what's going on. We've tried to be very open in our process with the schools and the public. And basically, in 2009, the IPM committee, after talking with Phil Boyce, thought that we could be effective using difascinine with hiring Phil as a consultant to help the district monitor the contractor as to where the bait was placed, how it was placed, and the methodology that was used. By now, Jeff Cope is no longer with the City Parks and Rec Commission, and Santos Escobar has taken his place on the committee. I hesitate to use the word expert, especially when talking with attorneys. Their definition of expert and mine may not be the same, but to me, Santos Escobar is one of the most knowledgeable, and Phil Boyce are two of the most knowledgeable people I know about pesticide use. And they both conferred that going back to what we tried in 2007 with greater control, looking at it that way was the proper next step. So as the board knows, they did approve a contract, not only for a vendor to apply the difascinine, but also approved a contract with Phil Boyce to monitor and assist the district to make sure that we were thoughtful, considerate, that we attempt to gain control of the problem once and for all. And as far as Phil Boyce is concerned, I have a letter from him that I'll read into the record that says the district went way beyond the legal requirements to eliminate any or minimize the effects of any secondary poisoning. Road trawl is not on the market and was not used. And for the board item on that, when the board approved it for this summer, I take responsibility for putting the road trawl in there by mistake. I don't have a secretary. I use a lot of cut and paste when I do my board items. And in cutting and pasting, I neglected to take road trawl off of the agenda. So you approved using either or. We didn't use road trawl. Number one, it's not available on the market. And number two, the California Department of Pesticide Control won't allow you to use it at this time. So we were within our what we had to do legally. Phil Boyce has written a letter that he asked me to read in to the record. I'll do that in a moment. But I will share with you that once you have this, you need to find out, were you successful? Phil Boyce thinks we were successful. One of the tests is you go out and spread oats the same place that you had spread the bait. And if the oats get eaten, there's still something out there to eat. If the oats don't get eaten, then you were successful in that area of eradicating the squirrels. Some of the speakers were correct. The same thing with squirrels with other pests. You want to take away the food. I think our schools do an excellent job of cleaning up after lunchtime. I've been there. I've seen, staff and custodians and their cleanup efforts, and especially around the buildings. There's not a lot of students that eat out on the play fields, but some of them do eat in the stands. And so let me read this letter just a moment. It's dated September 7, 2009, an email from Phil to please read this into the record. Please accept this brief memo as a description of my services and observations of the Santa Barbara School District efforts to manage the squirrel problem at Dos Pueblos and San Marcos High Schools. My services were requested to assist the district with minimizing secondary impacts of a planned bait application to squirrel controls. My efforts focused on minimizing the potential for secondary poisoning of non-targeted animals. The activities included map squirrel activity on both campuses to identify areas in which bait might be avoided. Colored maps were provided to the district and the contractor. Assist with the method of application. Spot applications were determined to pose the least environmental hazard because all squirrels would take a small amount of bait rather than a few consuming excessive amount of bait, as with bait stations. Low volume of bait with 2 ounce or 1 handful per 20 to 40 square feet, repeated 2 to 4 times as needed. Limited window of exposure with all bait consumed within a day of application over a 9-day period. The bait agreed upon was a 1% diphacinine anticoagulant bait. This was chosen based upon recent research by the UC Cooperative Extension demonstrating high efficiency and low environmental exposure with spot applications as described above. Assist the district and contractor with a rigorous monitoring schedule because hazardous exposure would be more likely through contact with a dead or dying squirrel than with the bait itself. Assist the district with a plan for the humane collection and dispatch of captured live squirrels based upon field Enthuesa protocol developed by the American Veterinary Medical Association and the Cornell University Cooperative Extension. Follow-up monitoring to gain a general sense of efficiency. I believe it would be fair to assign a success rate of between 85% and 95%. Both campuses revealed minor remaining squirrel activity. However, the levels were a very small fraction of the pre-baiting pressure. I guess pressure is the term that people use in the industry as far as the number of animals. So that's what they mean by pressure. Additionally, I've worked with the district in the past to develop a live capture technique to draw squirrels out from under portable buildings in the most humane way possible, based on protocol developed by the American Veterinary Medical Association and the Cornell University Cooperative Extension. Further observation. I've worked with the Department of Pesticide Regulation as their school IPM landscape trainer on and off for 6 years. In this capacity, I've had the pleasure of training over 500 school districts throughout California, and I, as the IPM coordinator, have taken part in that training. I can state that few have demonstrated the commitment to environmental responsibility as seen through the trapping and baiting efforts described here. Most districts use fumitoxin, a Category 1 fumigant. Many use bait stations or more hazardous toxins, both shown to increase non-targeted poisoning. The live capture and baiting monitoring protocol of the Santa Barbara School District have been useful training demonstrations to our other districts. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact me. In talking with Phil, he plans on using our district when he gives his seminars for the California Department of Pesticide Control that all districts are required to attend as an example of how to be environmentally friendly, on how to go through the processes, on how to, first of all, take every step you can not to use a pesticide, and when you do use a pesticide, to use the one that's the most environmentally friendly that's going to probably give you a success rate for eliminating the pest. So now where do we go from here? Well, I don't want to go back to using a pesticide again, but the first step is to reconvene our IPM committee, ask our 2 schools, our assistant principals from those schools that attended the IPM committees and the athletic directors to meet and talk about what we want to do in the future. The idea of using the gopher gas again in the springtime is back to a pesticide. I'd like the committee to look at using non-pesticide methods, basically going back to step 1, looking at maybe we can do some trapping again. Trapping gets the dumb animals, not the smart ones. You know, it's just a fact. You're not going to get the smart animals with trapping. The method of using propane and oxygen, in doing some research on the internet, we found a company that has a portable device. I'm going to present that to the IPM committee and let them make a decision of maybe we want to buy one and try that. It's a small scale device. From what I see, the advantages are that a school gardener could use the device early in the morning when no students are around. It's not as loud as the old shotgun blast of the method used 7, 8 years ago. And with the site gardener, you don't have to pay a contractor to come out 15, 20 times, because once you hit one hole, all the holes around it for the next 4 or 5 days, the squirrels may be gone. You want to try and wait for them to come back. You want to watch them. You want, there's squirrels maybe in a lot of areas, but they live in dens, so you want to try and find the den. And so I'm going to go back to the IPM committee. I'm not going to make a decision. I'm going to talk to the IPM committee, talk about recommendations, talk about ideas that they have. And I think we have a very good representation on our IPM committee based on the board AR. We have someone very knowledgeable. We have the IPM coordinator for the city of Santa Barbara, probably the premier leader in integrated pest management. Santos Escobar is on there. We have representatives of our both associations. We have parent representatives. We have staff representatives. We have a thorough discussion, and we do not take the use of pesticides lightly. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We do have board comment on this item. Shall we go ahead and take public comment? Public comment. How many speakers do we have?
We have 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.
All right, 4. And we're going to go ahead and close the public comment at this time, and we'll take those 4 speakers.
Carolyn Bernard, followed by Karen Monson, followed by Corey Bream.
Well, I'm very surprised to hear that there was a meeting of the IPM committee in 2009. For over a year, well over a year, I've been asking Mr. Hetjonk to notify me of when the next IPM committee meeting is going to be so that I could attend. And he keeps telling me, no, there's no meeting. This has been going on for over a year. So when did the IPM committee meet in 2009 that Mr. Hetjonk is referring to? And, it would really be good if there was more than one person knowledgeable about IPM on that committee. I know Mr. Hetjonk has some knowledge about it, but I'm talking about the other members of the committee. There needs to be more people with IPM knowledge to share at that committee. And I'm glad to hear that it's apparently going to be meeting. I don't know how all these decisions are being made when the IPM committee isn't meeting. They're being made in secret. I was also really shocked when I first contacted Mr. Hetjonk with a very innocent question about had he considered the barn owl boxes, and he was very offended because I was even questioning his method of dealing with this. You know, Mr. Hetjonk seems like a nice man, but you know, the public, the public would be a lot better served by someone who's just willing to answer specific questions that the public has about this very concerning issue of the use of pesticides on our children's school fields. Mr. Hetjonk's way of only putting on the list of toxins used, the ones that they use routinely, and just leaving off the ones that they might need to use if specific problems come up is really inappropriate. And I would ask this board to take action to not allow that to continue. The whole point of the list is for the public to know that if something does come up, what are they going to use? Without that being on the list, it's absurd. Also, just one other issue is that it's my understanding that one of the considerations that allows IPM management, and especially something like this ground squirrel problem, to be used in the most humane way is to consider the breeding cycles of the animals. I don't know about ground squirrels, they probably reproduce quite often, but a lot of animals reproduce in the spring, and I think ground squirrels are the type of animal that reproduces mainly in the
20
spring.
seconds.
If you then apply the method that you're going to use before the animals have had their babies, you're going to have to kill less animals. I mean, it just makes sense. I haven't heard that consideration being a part of this discussion. I hope it will be. Thank you.
Karen Monson, followed by Corey Bream, followed by Kate Smith.
I want to thank Mrs. Foster for your work and the other parents that are here. I know that there's a lot of parents that aren't here that have concerns about this issue. I wanted to say that what I haven't heard a lot about is perhaps some new creative ways to think about deterrence and getting even the students involved in the squirrel situation. We know that hearing that there's squirrels trying to come into classrooms and bite toes, I mean, I'm finding that really pretty amazing information. And if they're doing that, my guess is they're being coaxed on some level. So if we're thinking in terms of what we're teaching our students, like the other parent was talking about, why not get the students involved in this issue? You know, we have pesticides going into the ground, into the groundwater. We've got potential neighborhood animals getting killed and the wildlife getting killed in the neighborhoods from these animals going off and dying in their yards. If the students were told, look, we've got this squirrel problem, get the football team and their concerns about their injuries to really clean up the field and the stands and their lockers and all the stuff where they're eating stuff and throwing wrappers away. If everybody understood what is causing, like she was talking about the breeding, really looking in terms of cycles, get the whole population, okay, we've got the squirrel problem, what are we going to do about it? And get them involved in it. If you've got to go out sprinkling oats around to see if you've killed everybody off, I mean, I don't understand why we can't think in terms of the bigger picture and teach like we want to our students how best to control and live together, and that includes the squirrels. I mean, you know, this is, so I want to say that there's a lot of people concerned about this, a lot of people that couldn't be there and do not want these kind of toxic chemicals treating these animals inhumanely like they are, and also poisoning other neighborhood animals as well.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Corey Bream.
Can you answer questions during public comment? So I have a question. When Estelle Foster was given 10 minutes on the agenda, you cut her off at 10 minutes. When Dave was given 10 minutes, you let him speak for over 35. So I'm always here about special ed. Nobody's confused about that. I'm here, I'm on a mission, and I want it changed. But why is it when the comments are contradictory in nature, are they cut short right at the limit, absolutely stated 10 minutes, or 3? And then why is it when the comments are favorable to the board, they go on and on and on and on? Oh my God, on. 35 minutes. He was given 10. I want 35 minutes to talk about special ed things that I don't like and we need changed. I think it's wrong.
Kate, or Mrs. Smith, you have requests for this item, F3, F4, F6, and F7. Cumulatively, we allow 10 minutes. So on one of these items, you can have 3 minutes and the other's 2 minutes. So you take the choice of which one you want for 3 minutes.
I'd like to speak on this one for 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
I heard Mr. Hetjan say, oh, they didn't do a good job. This is just another example of incompetence. You get an F. Hello. Forgive me if I become a little didactic here. Schools are where our children play. They're little creatures, sometimes called rugrats, especially if we bring the toddlers, the younger siblings. They spend hours at our schools rolling on the grass. They spend hours sitting in the buildings. Pesticides are toxic. Poison is poisonous. Poison kills. Mrs. Foster was articulate, talking about how the rodents that eat the poison are then eaten by the cats and the other animals that feed on rodents. Not that we have time to go into the food chain, but it kills. And we're having to take our time, just 2 minutes, to tell you. In 1970,
20 seconds.
In 1970, there was a book called Away with All Pests. I suggest that you turn to a new way of school operation. Why don't you just abolish the County Office of Education? That would be $69 million. And then you and the school board and a pest management expert and the parents, teachers, and children of our schools could
Thank you, Mrs. Smith.
deal with the pest in a proper manner. Thank you.
Board members, any comments or questions on Mr. Hetjan's report? Mr.
I
Herron.
would like to know, when did the IPM meeting take place?
I can get you that date. The IPM committee is a staff committee, not a board Brown Act committee, per the administrative regulation. So it has a little different makeup, and it doesn't have the public notice inviting the public. It is a staff committee meeting. But I can get you the dates that we last met. And that information was given out to everybody that requested it, what dates we met. Previously, we don't use a lot of pesticides in this district. We had a problem getting a quorum to our meetings to do any business because we weren't using pesticides. That's the good thing. The bad thing is when you need to do business, you don't have a quorum and you can't do business. And if you look at our lists and you look at the amount of pesticides we use, it's very little. And
No, we understand.
there is a difference between elementary and secondary.
Absolutely. We understand that. We've heard the coaches. We know the problem.
Right. But I can get you the dates, and I'll put that in a board brief along with copies of Mr. Boyce's letter.
Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Bernard, at some point in some of her communication, talked about smoke bombs. Is that what you're talking about, the gas bombs? And that's
yes,
the second stage?
I believe we're talking about the same
Same
thing.
thing.
You see them all the time at hardware stores, the giant gassers. I have a picture of the label. I can show you the picture of the label.
So that's the one that makes the big...
No, that's the propane.
Okay.
This is the one that's a little cartridge about this long that you light and put in the hole and cover up the hole, and hopefully then the smoke goes in.
Dave, is that a sulfur gas?
Yes.
Yeah, because that's the one Mr. Bernard said she'd be happy to support and help you with.
And that's what we used, that we had limited success with, as I mentioned in my presentation.
Thank you.
And that's the one that I referred to in correspondence.
Any other comments? All right. At this time, the agenda says that we're scheduled for a break. However, we did have our break earlier in the evening, so if board members don't object, I'd like to go ahead and move on to item F3, update on status of special education.
May I make one comment on the last one?
Sure, Mr. Hammond.
At the time, it was the middle of summer, we had no board meeting scheduled. But I do want to compliment our president, Mrs. Parker, and Eric Smith, who was in charge at that point. They spent a lot of sleepless nights worrying about this and getting it communicated and talked about and answering questions. And I know it wasn't easy for the two of you, and so I appreciate all the effort you went through. We all, I'm sure, were asking questions of Mr. Smith and Mrs. Parker about the whole process. So it was not done lightly, and I know that it concerned them dramatically.
Thank you. F3.
Update on status of special education. As the board knows, twice a month we bring you a report to tell you about what we're doing in special education. Tom Guajardo, our Executive Director of Special Education, will introduce this. Tom?
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Sarvis, Ms. Sawaski, Mr. Smith. I'm pleased this evening. I've started my third week, and I've had an opportunity to get out to just about all the school sites. Did the high schools, the junior highs, and we'll conclude all the elementaries by the end of this week. I'm very impressed as I get out. I mean, folks are very receptive, high-quality staff out there. I was at one of the elementaries last Friday, and I noticed there were about 4 school psychologists out there. I said, "What is this?" And there were actually 3 others that were assisting, and that's how our special ed staff pulls together in need. There were 3 other psychologists out there helping out because we had a little bubble in some assessments that had to be done. And, that collaborative nature is just outstanding. So high quality staff out there, and I really have enjoyed visiting classes, talking to students as well. In addition to that, Carol and I sat down and divided up our responsibilities. And basically, I'm working on staffing, the continuum of services, what is available at each of our schools, and being able to see where the gaps are, and meeting. We've had numerous conversations with Dr. Butterfield at the SELPA, and she's been a tremendous resource for us. The implementation of the FICMAT action plan, parent outreach, closing the achievement gap as it applies to special ed students is an area that I'll be working on. Professional development, budget, and monitoring the budget on a regular basis, supervision of staff, and then we have a biggie, which is a special education self-review this year. Carol has been out meeting with parents, and so she's been involved in a lot of due process and resolving some of the outstanding cases that we have. Preparation of procedures, guidelines is what she'll work on. She's working on the FICMAT. She spent a lot of time just trying to put her arms around the 153 recommendations that were made, and was able to actually chunk them down into 16 clusters, if you will. And really what we want to do is take advantage of her expertise. Carol Miller is one of the best special ed people in the state of California, and I am very honored to be working with her and learning from her. And oh, sorry. And so those are the areas of responsibility as we've divided them up. And Carol wanted to do a quick update as well. Thank you.
I'll be very quick. Just an update of what we've done so far. We've conducted several alternative dispute resolution sessions to resolve potential special education complaints. I facilitated 2 administrative IEPs, and that resulted in collaborating and designing some appropriate services for students involved. And I'm involved in facilitating 4 additional administrative level IEPs. I respond to about 40 emails minimum a day, and those require technical assistance. Met with almost every department to see what services we can get. And we worked with the fiscal department in securing additional funds for the regional programs, communicated very closely with our consultants at California Department of Education, and Tom and I call SELPA almost on a daily basis. And we are in the process of opening an elementary special day class for children with autism through collaboration with Regional Center and our Autism Society. And we've had numerous meetings with parents, and Tom and I were participants in our first SEEK Special Ed Advisory Committee meeting last week, and we'd like to publicly thank SEEK for opening their arms to work with us. We're in the process of completing an instructional aid formula and process to complete when considering additional one-on-one aids. And our goal is to have a draft home hospital and a procedural handbook ready by probably mid-October. And we're in the process of finalizing the FCMAT stakeholders work group, and the work group we brought last time looked at, we will be looking at recommendations, consolidations of any duplicates, establish suggested timelines, and we will be having, instead of an all-day, I've been talking to a number of the groups, we'll have a late afternoon to accommodate the schedules so we don't interrupt students' instruction, and we will not be having it on September 17th because we're still finalizing the list. It will be late September, and then after the work group meeting, which will be open to the public so we can have public written and verbal input, we will have 3 community input forums at 3 different locations, and then the work group would meet again to work on the implementation plan. We've had a great response from community members, and we would like everybody to participate on the work group, but we just can't fit everyone. So we want to make sure that the meeting is open publicly. And we are happy to announce that Steve Menardis is retiring director from Goleta, will be our facilitator at that group. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we want to take public comment first? Or
Oh, public comment, okay.
if there's public comment on F3?
Carolyn Bernard, followed by Kate Smith.
I'm a little concerned to hear the report by Mr. Guardo, so glowing about a special education department that was described by the FCMAT as one of the worst they've ever seen. And they have years of dealing with districts in trouble. How could it suddenly be so wonderful? It gives me some concern to hear this. And this FCMAT stakeholder work group is a farce, so far as I can tell. It was supposed to be self-appointed, but as it's turning out, the district is appointing who's going to be on this work group. The public is going to have, and the voices that haven't been heard of the low-income people and all the families, are going to be distant voices that you're going to allow to be heard at some meeting as apparently part of some public comments. Mrs. Cordero had some suggestions about actually going and having community meetings where the actual community affected and these parents could have actual direct input into the formation of the plans and of the group itself. But oh no, the group is now limited to a certain number, as Ms. Miller just said, we can only fit a certain number of people into it. Well, the whole community should be involved in this, and it shouldn't be limited. It shouldn't be a representative stakeholder committee, which this district is turning it into. This is just a farce. Another farce, Mr. Sarvis.
Kate Smith, again, you can choose 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
2 minutes. I'm your parent representative to the Santa Barbara SELPA CAC. This is the second year of a 2-year term. Last year, the CAC did not have a quorum for the first 3 meetings. It was never a very active force as mandated by law. SELPA never wanted a community advisory committee until now. SELPA Director Jerice Butterfield and her colleague Claudia Echevarria have changed the culture of the SELPA. One CAC member, Retta Slay, has produced events, trainings, and student activities. I, too, have become active. Today, I posited a new special education model to Dr. Miller and Tom Guajardo. Every school will have a special education parent-teacher organization, like a SEPTA. That way, we can center on our children. We can support our teachers so that we have a teacher-directed environment, and we can have parent involvement. The parents will educate and support each other, and most importantly, communicate, collaborate, cooperate, and coordinate with the teacher. And then each school could send a representative to the special education task force that you've got going. We had that 5 years ago. It was called a CPAC. And it had some jolly meetings and some wonderful people. In fact, we were going so well that the Santa Barbara School Districts shut us down. So I want you to know that, I want to take this opportunity to appreciate Maria Nielsen, who provided professional and personable assistance to the parents. Her last day is September 11th. We wish her well and wish she would come back. And special education in Santa Barbara is known throughout the United States. Bill Cerrone and his cronies, Marcia McClish. Yeah, you did give David Hetjong 20 more minutes. And so I won't take that extra 10 seconds to finish my sentence.
Board members?
I had a question about whether the committee, the stakeholder committee, is going to be a board committee.
It will be a Brown Act committee, yes.
Okay, it will be a Brown Act committee?
Yes.
Okay. That was just my question.
Any other questions, Mr. Herron?
Just a couple. One, I'd just like a brief update as to how the first week of school went, as far as special education. Did it go better than last year? I would hope so. And two, did I understand, Dr. Miller, that you are going to have a series, it sounds like you're going to have a series of community meetings, and it sounds like the meeting's going to be open to the public, and I thought I heard that they, for the most part, they are nominated members. The groups are nominating somebody to join your group, correct? I mean, how many are we naming versus how many organizations are naming their representation?
Testing. Regarding the, yes, we will have community input forums. We will have 3, and we were looking at different locations, possibly Santa Barbara Junior High, La Colina Junior High, and La Cumbra Junior High in different areas.
Open to the whole community?
Correct. And the 2 work group meetings, one before the community forums and one after, will be Brown Act open to the community. I think the question becomes is how were the representatives chosen? And I had talked at the last board meeting about the different groups, and we had representatives from board members and parents and district office staff representing fiscal services, special education, educational services, and then school site administrators were looking for principals, as well as the special ed service providers, so we could have a psychologist, a nurse, a speech and language pathologist, some special ed teachers and general ed teachers, instructional aides, and DLAC members, as well as the SELPA and some parent organizations. So I'm the one who identified those areas as a cross-representation. That came from me carrying out the particular agenda item that was approved by the board.
How about community organizations like Esperanza or something like that?
I didn't identify those, like Esperanza, something like that. So, we can talk about that, because my direction was, the motion was to convene a representative stakeholders group to review the categories of recommendations, consolidate any duplicates, identify responsible entities for implementation, establish suggested timelines. So we talked about, when we limited the number of persons, it's just that those people are going to roll up their arms and we're going to, come up with some strategic consolidations, et cetera. And it was a workable group.
I would like you to consider adding a representative from Esperanza, just as a recommendation. You do with what you want. But I would recommend it.
And Dr. Miller, you identified the groups. However, in terms of naming the individuals that are serving on the committee, the district did not do that. Is that correct?
No, we did not do that. And those are still not finalized. I mean, we've got a few of the groups are finalized, and then some of the individual groups went through a different process, of self-selection process, for example, the association. And I just spoke with the CSEA, and they're still finalizing their process.
Okay. Any other board?
Well,
Mrs.
I'm just,
Escudero?
was Padres Unidos,
I did not do, I do not have a position for a community at large position.
was Padres Unidos included?
No.
Okay, because I'm just wondering, and Padres Adelantes? No. So I'm just wondering if there's a mechanism by which we can give, rather than just each of us sort of randomly throwing out things that we're thinking of, can we perhaps have a more formalized way of giving suggestions?
We'll be happy to take your recommendations.
Okay.
And if
I'm
you
just
do have other recommendations, please let us know.
Well, I guess I'm wondering whether the board wanted to make recommendations as a board of who should be included, or whether we're just going to have individual board members say whoever they think should be on it.
I would recommend that we have, at this point, knowing that they want to move forward, that we
Just
that
do
we
it
email
individually?
and do it individually,
Okay.
because otherwise there are people that we will forget, or community organizations that we forget.
Yeah, and my feeling about that is that if a board member says, well, I think this organization needs to be represented, then that's fine. If we're flooding in additional organizations and we end up with a committee of 60, then it's not going to be
Yeah.
very workable. So we can accommodate a couple of others, but not too many others.
Okay. Mr. Herron?
Yeah. What about the first week of school? How'd it go for special ed?
I understand that it went better than last year.
That's pretty easy. Yeah.
Robin, do you want to, because we talked about the instructional aides, and Tom's been out to the classes. We had the teachers on board.
Exactly. We did have we got a couple of emails.
glitches.
One of our schools in particular didn't have all of the assistants. It was kind of a last minute notice that the special ed department got. One student arrived, transition IEP was on Friday before school started. So there were a couple of incidents like that. Other than that, I did not hear anything. We all kind of talked to the principals, many of us in cabinet, just how did it go, responses, it was busy. We have issues with staffing, not with special ed necessarily, that we've been trying to address. So with special ed, everything I got was things were going smoothly, with a few, instructional assistants that still had to be placed. And we do have some teacher positions that we're still hiring, and so we have some substitutes in place.
And we still have students coming and going, and so we're still looking at the numbers of students and the aligning of the staffing in that area.
I think, just in defense of Tom, although he doesn't need any defense, when he talks about his experiences, keep in mind he's talking to our teachers and our personnel. And the survey showed that the personnel is great. So he's had one-on-one with people, and the people in our organization are great. And I think that's what he was reporting on. I don't think he was saying special ed is just wonderful now. He's talking about the people he's met, the relationship he's gotten, and I sure appreciate the fact that he's been to all the schools.
Thank you. Okay.
I just wanted to assure Mr. Guajardo that staff doesn't have a time limit on your reports that the board requests.
Oh, gee, don't tell him that.
With that, we will move
Thank
on
you.
to item F4, which is a request by Carolyn Renard to speak to the Board of Education regarding her allegation of unethical and illegal behavior of the Santa Barbara School District's administration that FCMAT, Fiscal Crisis Management and Assistance Team, has refused to deal with.
First, I'd like to say regarding the FCMAC stakeholder work group, apparently Ms. Miller, after all my years of advocating for students, low-income students with disabilities, doesn't think I represent any stakeholder group, despite the fact that I applied to be on this group the day after the board decided to form a not representative, self-selected only group, and I cannot, she has not put me on this group. Apparently, the group of students known as low-income
Mrs. Renard,
students with special needs is not an interest group.
you need to speak to your agenda
I
item
am
at this
speaking
time.
about the FCMAT report and some unethical things that are going on that FCMAT's not dealing with. Okay, I asked for 20 minutes for this important item, so there would be at least some board discussion, but I got only 10 as the board is desperately trying to avoid a real discussion about the FCMAT report. Having a board discussion is one of the very purposes of the California Education Code statute, allowing the public to put items on the school board agendas, as the board cannot discuss issues not on the agenda. So giving me only 10 minutes, Ms. Parker, so that the board doesn't have time to discuss this is really just shows where your area of interest lies, and it doesn't appear to be in having the board discuss this item. It's clear that the board, with the exception of Bob Noel, has no intention of dealing with the actual serious issues going on with this school district, many of which have become most patently obvious within the context of the special education program. I won't have time now to go into as much detail as I would like, but I'll do the best I can. First of all, after all the complaints of unethical and purposefully illegal behavior by this district, this board decided to hire FCMAT to do the investigation, knowing that FCMAT is only set up to deal with organizational issues and not non-compliance with the law and corruption. Nevertheless, FCMAT did, of course, receive numerous reports of illegal behavior being the policy and practice of this district when it comes to kids with learning problems and other disabilities. They told several people that they have never seen a district so dysfunctional, and they have decades of experience working with districts in trouble. As I've already reported to this board to no avail, when I asked the FCMAT investigators what they would do with these reports that they've gotten of illegal behavior if they weren't going to deal with them, and they refused to answer me. I have this documented. When I went to the state FCMAT director, he also simply refused to respond to this question. When I went to the California Department of Education, Mary Hudler, she also refused to respond. There's literally no recourse for complaints of corruption in our schools. That's why it's so bad. There's no accountability. And I ask, where is the accountability for this special education mess? I see that there's going to be this apparent farce of a committee formed, but where is the real accountability? There's been no effort to hold those responsible for this situation, which has affected the lives of countless vulnerable children. And what about restitution for all the children whose lives have been ruined and who are now out of school, either dropped out or graduated without knowing how to read or write, and maybe in juvenile hall or on probation, if not dead? Regarding accountability, I'm speaking about Superintendent Brian Service, the person responsible for this district. That is the job of the superintendent, to be responsible for the district. Let us remember, during the years and years when we would come to this board and administration, and Ms. Cordero, if you would look at me when I'm talking, I would appreciate it instead of writing something. And we would plead for help with the low-income students and learning problems whose civil rights were being violated, who were being dumped into the jail schools to improve the No Child Left Behind scores and being unnecessarily criminalized, who were unable to read and write, who were dying and becoming depressed. Mr. Sarvis did not respond with, "Oh, I know we have problems, we're trying to fix them." No. When he thought he could get away with it, he would repeatedly act like he didn't know what we were talking about. He repeatedly would act surprised like we were crazy and say over and over, "I've looked into these allegations and we're totally in compliance." This is what Mr. Sarvis did. Does this show integrity to you? Well, the FCMAT report shows without a doubt that this was not true the whole time Mr. Sarvis kept claiming that, "Oh, we've looked into this, we're totally in compliance." This was not true. The FCMAT report is indisputably evidence of this fact. Was Mr. Sarvis mistaken, or was he lying? There are but two choices. He's either so incompetent that he didn't know, despite years of complaints that the special ed department was the most dysfunctional that the FCMAT people had ever seen, or he was covering up and making false statements. And while I have many complaints about Mr. Sarvis, I do not think he's stupid. He's very clever. Either way you want to look at it, Mr. Superintendent Sarvis is grossly at fault here, and I have heard nothing regarding holding him accountable from this board, or holding anyone accountable. Yet this board, with the exception of Bob Noel, supports Mr. Sarvis in lockstep, and sometimes Ed Herron asks some good questions also. But so far he's been supporting the majority of this board. Regarding the SELPA, the Special Education Local Plan Area County Level Special Ed Administration, which was also a subject of the FCMAT report, it's my fear that Mr. Sarvis is being groomed to replace Bill Cerrone as Superintendent of County Office of Education. I can just see it. Mr. Cerrone takes an early retirement and appoints his buddy Sarvis, so Sarvis is then the incumbent when the election cycle rolls around. God help our whole county if that happens, but it looks likely to me. Then I thought, how has Mr. Sarvis been dealing with the Joint Powers Association meetings? That's the board running the SELPA. The grand jury recommended several years ago, that the Santa Barbara School District Superintendent attend all SELPA JPA meetings. Over the past few years, the JPA superintendents have bravely managed to wrest some of the control of their SELPA money that's supposed to be for their districts, away from the County Office of Ed's clutches, where it was being used as a cash cow for millions of dollars. I thought if Mr. Sarvis was actually attending these meetings, he would have to support these superintendents reasonably trying to get back their money from Mr. Cerrone, a position Mr. Sarvis would likely not want to be in with Mr. Cerrone. I looked into this, and sure enough, Mr. Sarvis, despite the grand jury's recommendation, has apparently not, as so far as my information, not been going to the JPA meetings all school year. While the special ed department is in complete turmoil, he's not going to the JPA meetings. Clearly, Mr. Sarvis doesn't want to go against his friend Bill Cerrone. Since Mr. Cerrone now does all the superintendent hiring searches for the county, it's just a question of time before it's all Cerrone hires on the JPA board anyway. What a sad situation. This is not a democracy, it's an oligarchy. It wasn't until the higher income special education families started being cheated out of their services that parents who had real clout started making a fuss about what was going on. I have wondered why Mr. Sarvis started doing this to the higher income students, because it wasn't a very smart thing to do. And Mr. Sarvis is smart. Then I realized that this was just happening at the time when millions of dollars were also disappearing and then reappearing at the district. Who knows what happened to the money that should have provided aids and services to those upper income kids with disabilities for the past 2 years. The budget is now so convoluted there is no way to know. But I imagine that money pulled this district out of some trouble wherever it went. What a coincidence. And this board doesn't even care to ask about it. The main problems reported, violations of students' rights, haven't even been looked at. Why didn't you go to an organization that would actually deal with these problems to do the investigation? The answer is pretty clear. You didn't want to. This board, with the exception of Bob Noel, appears to be more interested in maintaining the Good Old Boys network that is running this community.
You have about 1 minute.
Who are the good old boys? Well, you see it when Bob Noel calls for Sarvis's resignation over the special education mess for good reason, as the FCMAT report later proved. We get the president of the Chamber of Commerce, Steve Cushman, coming to the board and defending Sarvis and saying that it's Bob Noel who should resign, not because Sarvis is a good superintendent. He doesn't mention a thing about the actual running of the school. I doubt he knows a thing about how the schools are run. He came and said that it's Bob Noel who should resign because Sarvis is such a, quote, nice man. This is the Good Old Boys network in action.
20 seconds.
It should be more accurately called the educational politico complex, and this board is right in there with them. I asked Mr. Cushman to speak to the parents of children who had died because of the policies and practice of this school district to see if they think Mr. Sarvis is such a nice man. The nonprofits are even afraid to speak out against the schools because they're all financially and politically dependent on them, as is UCSB's Gevert School of Education, in my opinion. And what about the one illegal policy the FCMAT people couldn't help but report, the illegal sending of special ed students to El Puente? You guys haven't even brought that up about doing anything about it.
Mrs. Renard.
Mr. Heron did try once to bring it up as an item of discussion. Yes. I guess I'm not a Dave Hetjonk, am I? I don't get 20 extra minutes because I am not saying good things about the school district. No, I got to cut mine off in mid-sentence.
At this point, we will move on to item, do we have public comment on this one?
What was that number?
F4.
Yeah, we have Kate Smith.
Okay.
Again, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, Kate.
3 minutes.
There is systemic and systematic violations of IDEA, ADA, Section 504, and FERPA. Retaliation is severe. The board is derelict in their duties of oversight, and the school administrators are criminals. They are running a racketeering, influenced, and corrupt organization. And I hope you're indicted, and I hope to God you suffer. The FCMAT was a result of a parent uprising. The FCMAT was another way to deal with a very stinky elephant by feeding it. Anise McNeil, oh, wait a minute, I only have 3 minutes, hold on. Okay. On January 29th, I discussed the FCMAT process with Alan Hilton. I have a letter from him that documents our conversation. He told me, the FCMAT will not be investigating or dealing with compliance issues at all. The process, of course, was suspect. Only those who learned about the investigation were able to get an appointment. Finally, common decency prevailed, and the parents forced the Santa Barbara school districts to sponsor group parent meetings. I attended the one where there were 150 Hispanic parents packed into a hall. A father of a child denied special education services and whose child was pushed into the pipeline, just returned from visiting him in Santa Maria, where he had been sent. He started to cry. And the rest of the people in the hall joined him. We are outraged and suffering. Bob Gillespie, head of the FCMAT team, told us this was the worst situation he had ever encountered. We've done this before. We spent $32,000 to evaluate Diana Rigby. That report was never seen even by the school board. It was shredded. This is my year of living dangerously. I was illegally disqualified from the school board ballot, and Ed Heron said,
15 seconds.
If 17,500 people voted for her despite her disqualification, and they did, that we'd better take a look at that. I suggest that you do. I accuse you of criminal activity, and I vow to expose school corruption, to reform education, and to restore justice and democracy in our schools and community. Please visit SB School Talk and come to your senses.
Thank you.
And moving on to item F5, discussion on the prevention of harassment by students in sports programs.
The prevention of harassment by students in sports programs is something that Michael Gonzalez, our Director of Compliance and Student Services, has worked on with the athletic directors at each of the high schools. It's an important issue to us. Whenever we hear of an incident, then we redouble our efforts, and it's an important topic.
Thank you. By way of introduction, I've provided the board and members of the public with relevant board policies and administrative regulations that very clearly spell out the conduct of students and staff responsibilities to make sure harassment does not take place. In preparation for this presentation, each of the schools, high schools, provided a document or a series of documents that outline what exactly takes place at each of the schools when issues of harassment do surface. Each of the athletic directors of the high schools is present today to answer any questions the board may have about what happens when harassment takes place, what efforts we do to prevent harassment of athletes, and any other questions will proceed.
Board members?
Real,
Mr. Aaron.
real simple question, you know, words, actions, and deeds. These are great words. How is it working? What is taking place? Do we have any harassment? Do we have any problems? Can you give us some examples of what has happened or what is happening? 'Cause I know we have all the words, we have all the policies, just is it working?
Please come up.
We had a problem the other day where we had a.
I'm sorry, Nan, let's introduce you. Nan.
I'm Nan Verkuyk. I'm the athletic director at Santa Barbara High School.
And we have Abe no, go ahead.
I'm Dan Feldhaus. I'm the athletic director at Dos Pueblos.
Abe Jahadami, athletic director at San Marcos High School.
Good, thank you. Go ahead, Nan.
We had an issue the other day where there was starting to be a few little problems things that we didn't like. It was happening on the freshman team, which is normally where it happens because the older kids kind of take care of each other. They do take care of each other. So we brought in 2 of the varsity captains and 2 of the freshman captains and spoke with the individual where we thought there was a problem. And that's kind of how we do it there. Our best resources are our athletes, and we've had no problems for the last couple of weeks. So, I mean, the problem could come up again, and we'll come up with a different scenario, but all of us work really hard with our kids to make sure they're not afraid to come tell us stuff, and that we do come up with a fair and equitable, solution to the problem, which is basically education of the athletes.
Can I
Yes,
ask
Mrs.
for
Padera.
clarification on that? Nan, when you were, you said that there was an incident and you spoke to the individual. Do you mean you spoke to the individual that was being harassed or the one that was accused of being the harasser?
The first thing I did was talk to the 4 captains, because those are our leaders, and ask them if they had any ideas for me on what they thought might be a solution to the problem. You can come down really hard on one of the kids, and obviously if it's a severe situation, you have to. You can come down really hard on the kids. Sometimes it makes it worse. Sometimes it makes it better. The kids had some great ideas, and they approached the young man. We had a meeting with the 4 of them plus the person that was harassing and myself, and I really didn't speak during that meeting. And the kids spoke to the young man and told him, if you can hang in there and do the right stuff for a year, you won't have this problem next year, because your team will be more important to you than anything that you could be doing outside of what's right. thought it was good information.
I'm Dan Feldhaus. I'd like to just address some of the, just to give you some facts. I talked to, this is my second year as athletic director. I talked to our former athletic director, Dan Choi, who still teaches on campus, and I asked him over his 5-year tenure if there was any incidents that were reported to him of things along this line, and he said over his 5 years there was no incidences. Last year we had one incident where a female athlete that was on a male team had a problem, and unfortunately it was not brought up to the staff or to myself, and it kind of came up later, and we dealt with it in time. But unfortunately, we have measures in place that something like this comes to us, we're going to act on it, and unfortunately this didn't come to us at the appropriate time. We had over almost 1,100 students participate in athletics last year, probably about half and half male and female, and this is not a problem that we typically see at any of the schools. So I'm sure we can go over some of the measures that we have in place to prevent things like this, or if things come up, what the steps do we take? But I think it's written in the memos that you received. So.
We have a lot of measures that we take to prevent such occurrence. In the 6 years that I've been athletic director, we've never had a sexual harassment incident at our school. Thank goodness. But we take this very, very seriously. Like Nan talked about, we're open door. Any of our athletes can come in and see us at any time. We're non-threatening. We run rallies. We had a fall athletic rally that all the athletes were out there, and we went over harassment, and the steps to take if that ever happens. And we told our athletes, we want you to be comfortable. We want you to go out there during practice and feel good about yourselves, and the steps to take right away if that does happen. And so we've been very fortunate that this is something that's rare that's happened in the athletic department.
I would like to ask a couple questions, if board members don't mind. Mr. Feldhaus, you were bringing up that there was an incident last year at Dos Pueblos, but one of the problems was that the student did not bring it forward in a timely manner. There are going to be times when young athletes are worried, uncomfortable, afraid about bringing problems forward to either their coach. Sometimes they may even hide it from their parents, and certainly to take it to higher levels. So in retrospect, what would you have done differently in terms of making sure that a student was more comfortable? I mean, what I'm hearing about is that a lot of you have a verbal, you have a speech that you give to students at the beginning of the season, I assume. But is there anything written that you do? Is there any way that students that may hear it and then forget it the next day can go back and refer to, well, I'm having this problem and this is really scary to me, or it might affect my playing time, it might affect my relationship with the coach, with all my teammates. I know it's tremendously stressful for students. So what would you do differently? What are you doing differently? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Just about every year I address the coaches. We have seasonal meetings. All coaches are required to do in-services, and we go over what's required of coaches, not only in this area, but all of aspects of dealing with our student athletes. And this is an area that I emphasize very well. I guess one thing I would change is there might have been one coach that failed to do his job, and maybe didn't think it was something that was very important to deal with, and that coach is no longer with us. And in the future, I'm going to emphasize to these coaches that if there's any doubt, you need to bring it up to not the coaches, not necessarily the athletes. Mm-hmm. If you think there's anything going on over there with these relationships between these male and female athletes, and granted they're very rare, but if there's something going on there that needs to be addressed, you can't just shuffle it under the rug. This needs to be addressed, and there needs to be it needs to be addressed, and the administration needs to be made aware of it, and the proper steps need to be taken. Again, like Mr. Jahadabi said before me, just having that communication with my female athletes, specifically that are in those sports where they're competing against boys, and also specifically addressing those coaches that are in those situations, making them aware. I think Ms. Nan said education is the key, and educating those athletes and those coaches that this is a situation with these both genders on the same team potentially can have problems. And we just have, about every year we have a female athlete that plays on the football team. I know Santa Barbara has one this year, 2 this year. We had 1 last year, and most of the time it's not a problem. Like, we didn't have any problem last year with our young lady that played on the football team. She had a great experience, but I based on what I saw last year, I'm going to not only talk to those individual athletes, but also pull those coaches aside and remind them, but just be extra sensitive and bring any issues to me directly. So, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Cordero?
Well, I'm going to express a concern that's sort of similar, and then I'm going to ask you a question. The concern that I have is, and it sounds ironic, but I'm actually a little, I have a concern that the fact that there aren't any cases being reported, that can mean that there's no incidences taking place. But it can also mean, especially when we're talking about 1,100 students, that they're just not being reported to you, that they're occurring, but they're not but that the students either don't feel like they know how to deal with it, or they don't feel comfortable bringing it forward. And I don't know if that's the case or not, so I'm not making. I'm just saying that comes up for me as a concern, and then here's the question, because it's kind of related to that, and that is that I notice in all of the documentation that we got, there's a lot of a written list. There's things about what you do with the coaches. There's information that you give to the students, but students who harass other students are typically acting on a long-term attitude or sort of perspectives that they have, which you're not likely going to get rid of by just telling them on the first day of the season that this isn't tolerated. I didn't see anything in your materials about anti-harassment training for the athletes. And I'm wondering, is this only directed at sexual harassment, or what about students who are harassed because of sexual orientation, because of their race or ethnicity, because of their disability levels? What about other kinds of harassments?
I hear what you're saying, but I honestly feel very confident that the students do come up when there is a problem. I mean, when they have a bad day at practice and the coach is mean, they come into my office. So something that's serious, and we take this very seriously, they would be in my office in no time. They know that it's an open door. They can come in at any time. And so I hear stories all the time, and they're not afraid to come in there and talk to me about that. We have twice a year, we have the staff, all staff and students go through a reminder about hate crimes and harassment issues and what resources there are at the school available for them. We do have that. We do not put up with students that are going to harass other kids. There are anger management courses at the school that they can go through, and then also we go by the student handbook, and it has the consequences for students that do go out there and harass other kids. But I feel real confident that at least in our athletic department, that when there are issues, that the students come in and see us.
We have a captain's council, which is made up of the captains from the different teams. Those kids meet together probably once a month, sometimes more often. And any athlete can bring up something to one of those captains if they're not feeling comfortable bringing it up to us. The older kids will come in to my office all the time, to the point where you're saying, you know, go do something else. But it's really, I feel like the kids are free to say what they want to say. There aren't repercussions for saying something, that we will check into it and do the best we can. And I think the best example is one of the kids wrote a little saying at the end of the year a couple years ago: it's hard to find diversity when you share a common goal. So when all the kids are working so hard at what they're doing, even those kids that aren't necessarily the kids that you think of as being great kids on the outside, those kids all have a goal that they're working towards, and they're working together with their friends. And when that happens, you don't have a lot of the things that you might have on the outside. It's one of the best things about sports. You know, the only gang you belong to at Santa Barbara High School is the Dons. And kids will use that to their advantage, you know, even on the streets. So I think, to be honest with you, I think they're not afraid to come and say something. I think it's a very open policy.
Mr. Herron, any comments? All right, thank you very much.
We have one public comment.
We do have one public comment on that, okay.
Corey Bream.
Thank you.
No.
Board, I'd like to not address you for a moment and thank the coaches. I really believe you are the gang that kids have instead of a gang, so it's great. And I think most often those kids do feel comfortable going to their coaches. You're really a valuable part of our educational system, and we're lucky to still have coaches in sports, so thanks. I would like to bring up the harassment issue as being really important and maybe needing more attention. It goes to special ed, obviously. Sports are the common goal, and I think training is the common goal that's needed, because if you remember behavior, bullying doesn't work unless there's an opportunity, a victim, and a bystander. And if you train the bystanders to not be the audience, there's no reinforcer for the bully. Did I go too fast? Okay, good. I just needed a head nod. I got most of you. I really believe that if you train the other kids and do these programs that go to schools, that you help that scenario. However, I have a story that's real life. Ready? My son was bullied to the point where the child threatened his life multiple times, shoved his face in the mud and he couldn't breathe, broke 2 pair of glasses, tore multiple shirts, tortured him every single day. So I want to tell you this because it's really important. You have a no bullying policy. So I bring to the principal the issue. They sort of believe it, sort of don't. Then 4 staff members were required to pull the bully off my son as he's choking him in a lock hold, and my son can't breathe and is turning purple. And he's yelling, "I'm going to kill you." Now everybody believes me and we're all on the same page. This is progress, right? You know what they did to the bully? Nothing. Process that. There is no policy to handle a bully, especially a bully who's threatening my son's life in the elementary level. This is a real story. So I think you need more training, and you need real policy that has some backup. You need to move the bully, just like you do in a harassment suit. I'm harassed sexually by Joe. Joe gets moved. They wanted to move my son. So I think that the board and the district really need to pay attention to the issue, not just with regard to sports and sexual harassment, but with regard to every single child. Bullying is about training the audience. You need to train the audience. You need more education. I know we're short on funds, but a lot of these companies locally do these things for free. They go to different schools, they put on programs, they do it for free, and it's available. And when there's a bully, you need to act and not do what you did with me. I went to the police department and filed a suit, and you know what? They wouldn't even take a report because it was a school district issue. It happened on the district grounds, it happened at school. So just know that I ran into a lot of situations that were difficult, and it's all about bullying, and you need no audience and you need training.
Item F6, report on legal expenses for 2008-2009 and plans to reduce expenses in the future.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just wanted to follow up on that one. I'm reporting tonight on district legal services and expenses, and I've provided information in 4 general areas.
Dr. Sarvis?
Yes.
I noticed that Carol Miller's not here, and I noticed that Tom just...
We'll follow up on it. We just...
No, that 2 of the people that should be hearing this legal situation with special ed have just left.
No, but I may need Carol Miller here. There she is.
Okay.
There she is. She was conferring, I see. Okay, good. Dr. Miller, thank you for being here. I've provided information in 4 general areas. First, I have some general comments about legal fees. Secondly, there's a section on special education legal services. Third, legal and other costs associated with a teacher dismissal case, which failed and is now concluded. And 4, new procedures for oversight and cost containment that I am implementing. First, generally, legal services are rendered to the district by different law firms based on their area of specialty. The major areas are areas like labor, labor and employment, student discipline matters, special education services, general counsel, other miscellaneous work including bond counsel, parcel tax matters, and charter school issues. Most lawsuits against the school district are handled and paid through insurance using either outside defense firms or, in some very specific cases, the office of our general counsel. This district has been very successful at avoiding litigation. This is especially true for construction-related activities, and that's very important because construction litigation costs are not covered by district's insurance. And we are currently at the point where we have spent some $150 million on bond construction projects. That was the bond money, parlaying state matching funds. In some cases, we had organizations from the community coming forward and donating money so that we could build out some project in some bigger way. $150 million in projects. There has been no litigation to date on any bond project, and that is quite remarkable. I have been told that by a number of our architects, by a number of the people that we have dealt with in this endeavor, and I would like to recognize specifically the efforts of facilities under Dave Hetyunk and the efforts of General Counsel Craig Price in working together. They've formed quite a team and have been just outstandingly successful in this. Other non-construction related litigation has also been minimal, but I will report later on 2 areas of concern, one in special education and one on the teacher dismissal case. You will see a breakdown, in fact you have it in your exhibits, you see a breakdown of the district's legal expenses and settlement costs for 2008-09. So this is for all of last year. We've waited until the end of the year so that we get the final amounts, and they are in Exhibit 1. The largest category of expense is $262,000, and that's for legal services by Fagan, Friedman, and Fullfrost, otherwise called F3, and nearly all of that was spent on special education. The next largest expenditure was for Liebert, Cassidy, and Whitmore. We use Liebert, Cassidy, and Whitmore for personnel, labor, student discipline matters, and the total of those charges was $219,000. And finally, Griffith and Thornburg's fees for general counsel services were $85,000 for last year. Exhibit 1 also has the figures for legal settlements paid, which total some $470,000. We wanted to present all costs. In this case, some $275,000 represents attorney's fees that were awarded to pay for opposing counsel in the teacher dismissal case. And most of the balance of the settlement payments relate then to special education. In total, this last year, we have spent over $1 million, over $1.1 million in legal fees and settlements, and that is too much. To provide some comparison with other districts, I've attached 2 grand jury reports. They're in Exhibits 2 and 3. One is for 2005-06, the other is for 2006-07. And the board will note that compared to other districts, we seem to be in alignment in those years. The board will note some nearly $1 million in legal expenses incurred by Santa Maria Joint Union High School District just for school construction, and we'll also note the accompanying admonition regarding the importance of careful monitoring and oversight of construction contracts. And this is a big issue for other districts. Districts regularly get into major difficulties in legal expenses on construction projects. I guess I've made that point. These reports show that nearly all agencies are required as a cost of doing business to spend considerable sums of legal fees. And you see that among city agencies, well, there are a lot of agencies listed in these reports. And that there are major fluctuations in those expenditures because none of those come in any sort of a smooth way. In special education, a total of $262,000 were paid to Fagan, Friedman, and Fullfrost, nearly all of which was special education. This is in addition to our settlement costs paid to special education service providers and to third-party special education attorneys to resolve claims. In Exhibit 1, you have further detail concerning Fagan, Friedman, and Fullfrost legal fees and costs that are provided in Exhibit 5, which show all charges for, between July 2006 and July 2009, broken down by category. So that's in addition to Exhibit 1. Of the total fees and costs in the amount of $320,000, the only significant non-special education fees and costs were the $10,000 incurred in defending the appeals by the American Charter High School. It goes without saying that there are too many separate student cases represented, and that this was a major impetus for my call for an outside agency to look at our special education services. We were hearing from too many parents. They were resulting ultimately in too many claims. They were resulting ultimately in too many claims, and as was verified by the FCMAT report, our relationships with parents were the primary fault. We did not have good relationships with our parents. We went to the point of incurring legal expenses when simply by working with people more cooperatively up front, we could have headed off a lot of that. And as you saw in the report a year ago from then the Director of Special Education, we were already overusing legal services. In fact, I asked Dr. Carol Miller, because she has some element of some objectivity from being outside the district. I asked her to prepare the summary that you see in Exhibit 4, outlining areas of concern that we've identified involving the creation of due process issues and the setting forth of good practice recommendations that were arrived at during the period that this firm, Fagan, Friedman, and Fullfrost, has been providing special ed services. Dr. Miller has included 4 specific recommendations from the FCMAT study dealing with due process issues, and of course, our productive working relationships with our parents are critical to this issue. Dr. Miller is with us tonight to discuss these areas of advice, including training and recommendations on good practice. I won't ask for her presentation of that. You have it in front of you, but it's certainly up for discussion. In addition, in Exhibit 6, and I'm moving to the last part of the third part of this report, actually, which provides a breakdown of the costs associated with the Harmachis dismissal case. This covers 5 years of legal charges from Liebert, Cassidy, and Whitmore, and that's different from the rest of the report, which is simply legal fees on last year alone. So those charges are over a 5-year period. They also include the opposing legal fees awarded by the court, and they include the administrative leave salary. I wanted you to see all of those things. Altogether, those all add up to some $900,000, close to $1 million. Finally, in the last part of this report, I am implementing cost containment practices on legal expenses. I have requested that Craig Price and his firm, Griffith and Thornburg, as our general counsel, begin taking a role in monitoring the services provided and fees charged by other district legal counsel. Now, in the business world and in other public agencies, general counsel commonly oversees and supervises the work being undertaken by outside law firms. In fact, I've talked to a number of other organizations that do this on a regular basis. This may include reviewing legal services contracts, reviewing legal bills to ensure appropriate reporting and charges, obtaining and reviewing status reports from counsel, discussing and providing input regarding cases handled as they're handled as to whether they're appropriate, making cost-benefit evaluations, and so forth. I believe that this will provide for closer monitoring, better oversight, and additional cost containment beyond what our business office staff, which is not legally trained, is able to accomplish. Griffith and Thornburg specifically is well trained for this task. They have had extensive experience in litigation and in a wide range of other legal matters involving the district. They know our district. They know what areas we are involved in. District staff and the board have also been pleased by the quality of services rendered by Griffith and Thornburg. And I do not anticipate the need to modify our legal fee arrangement with Griffith and Thornburg at this time. We negotiated a cap on their services a number of years ago, and we're not near that cap. There was a point, 3-4 years ago when I think we hit that cap, and we have not since. In fact, every time we ask for another legal opinion, that adds to the expense. Whether we feel that legal counsel needs to be at our meeting for any purpose, that adds to the expense. For those meetings when we feel legal counsel will not be necessary, then we save money by doing that. But our goal is to do things correctly, to observe the spirit of the Brown Act, to run our meetings efficiently, to have our meetings in public, in public view, and they serve us well in that regard. In fact, I would refer you also to the statement from the grand jury that commends action on the part of the school district for acquiring a site legal counsel, and the grand jury stated that this is money well spent. Well, I expect the additional services will result in cost savings and other improvements in the overall rendition of legal services to our district. And if you have any questions about any of the exhibits, we have Meg Jeté, who helped prepare the first exhibit. We have the grand jury reports. We have the exhibit that I had asked Dr. Miller to compile. And board, it's open to your discussion.
All right, board members, first of all, I will point out that at this point, it's after 10:30. My suggestion would be that we finish this item, but pull item F7, which is the update on implementation of parent paid transportation. Any comments or questions on this item? Mr. Herron?
Yes, I'm not quite sure where to start. First, thank you for all the information. My specific request related to the, as you call it, the F3. And so I'm going to limit my discussion to that. I think the other, all are well documented and make perfect sense, and I have no problem with it. When I asked back on July 14th to have an update on F3, I had some specific things in mind, and I knew at that moment in time that the number being presented for legal fees was not accurate, and I think these numbers are much more accurate. My first question is, you mentioned that these numbers include service providers. You use it in terms of the settlement that included service providers. And I just wonder, Mrs. Jate, service providers are not in a settlement, in the settlement category. I think they're 5810, and these are like the Hayden Group and those kinds of things. Did you mean that that 200,000 includes all of those services from outside providers?
No, if you look at the top of Exhibit 1, you have settlement costs, and then you have legal costs broken out separately.
Right, but
When-
there's a third category of what we pay for service providers who provide service to the students for diagnostic and for recommendations and that kind of stuff.
And I don't have a final number for you on
Yeah,
I-
so
I
that
don't
number,
have a-
but
That-
that number,
that's not
this is
legal.
not included in these numbers. All that extra money we
No.
spend doing testing on students, those are service provider fees that are in addition to settlement and in addition to legal. So,
No, they're not in here.
right, so that's a whole different number that is not here. Okay, that's one. Back a year ago, the contract with F3 was for $45,000, not to exceed $45,000. And the justification was a risk management strategy of hiring an attorney, paying the daily rate, and utilizing their expertise to serve a myriad of functions and ultimately reduce the cost of legal fees and assist in avoiding litigation. So an agreement not to exceed 45,000 ended up a year later at 262,000. There's a lot of feeling out there that part of the problem is F3. And so I asked the task force,
Here you go.
well, I guess I should say I asked special ed department, and again, I have no idea about F3. It's just, I think there's a perception that they're part of the problem, and I would like that relationship looked at. The contract was up for renewal, mainly because they added $5 to one of their hourly fees. And then when they changed that back, it's no longer up for renewal. But it has been in existence over a year. Actually, contract before that was April of '08. And obviously, according to these numbers, it went before that. So I would ask special ed to at least look at that relationship, talk to parents, and I asked, that we talk to parents, that we talk to staff, just to make sure that if they are part of the problem, that it be looked at to see if there's, and Mr. Price, when you look over the things, going from a not to exceed 45, a year later, having fees of 262,000, to do things to limit legal expenses didn't seem to work. And I know we have all the problems. I understand all the problems. But, so that's one thing. The other thing I asked, and I guess, again, I'm learning all the time how to ask questions, but I didn't ask the right question, I don't think. Dr. Miller, your recommendations on things we learned and good practices, where did that come from?
I reviewed all of the cases and identified the areas that were of concern.
Is there any
And-
documentation, is there any letter, is there any correspondence from 3F or F3 saying, hey, in this case, you should have done this, you should have learned this, you should be doing this, here's what we recommend, here's how we can train and help it? Was there anything from F3 with those kind of things that you
where there wasn't anything in the records, so I had correspondence with F3, and I sent my review to them and said, could you add or subtract to this? And so I worked with them, but I identified the first list, and then they added a few things.
I'll just make it really clear. In my business experience, if I paid my attorney $263,000 for problems, they would have been on my doorstep telling me, hey, you need to stop this. Here's what we can do to help you. Here's what you need to change. Here's what should be taking place. And if F3 didn't do any of that, then I really am unhappy.
We, in looking at each case, F3 shared some of the concerns and the red flag areas in each of the cases.
Was that in your review you just did?
Most of those concerns in my review were repeated concerns over and over again.
No, but did you just find out about them because you were doing this report for us?
Since I came in reviewing each of the cases myself, I have met with F3 numerous times and have identified those in each of the cases.
But they
Yes.
didn't take proactive steps.
You're asking if we went to them or they came to us?
Yeah, right. Did they take proactive steps to get us out of trouble?
I can't answer that because I,
That's
you
what,
know.
that's the question I would like answers to.
Any other comments? I wanted to say thank you in particular for including the grand jury report. That was extremely informative, and it really helped tie things together for me. And I'm very appreciative of the direction that you're heading in terms of using Griffin and Thornburg to help us reduce costs. I think that's definitely the direction we need to go in. So I would like to, I hope that you'll be keeping the board apprised of how that's going. It's the sort of thing where it's a little hard to say, well, this quarter you saved money, but then of course the next quarter you'll lose money. So I know it'll end up being a year-long picture, but I really would like updates on how that's going. Mr. Smith?
Could I ask General Counsel Price a question? Within your professional code of ethics, if you're going to do bill review, do you have the latitude to negotiate down bills?
Yes.
Okay, I'm satisfied.
I mean, I could go on and explain more, but I think that's the basic.
It was a simple
I mean,
yes or no
obviously,
question.
there are contracts that are in existence between outside law firms and the district that need to be adhered to, but there's still, a certain amount of flexibility and ability generally of general counsel to do that.
Yeah, I was just, if you noticed something that you thought was excessive or, extraordinary, you have that latitude then.
Well, I think now we're talking about something that's more than latitude, that becomes something approaching an obligation.
And let me just add that I understand in other businesses and other organizations that this kind of thing has a longer-term effect in reducing the bills that come to us in the first place after someone has gone through this questioning process.
Great.
I would like Mr. Price to look at the contract we have with F3.
Fagan, Friedman, and
Yeah.
Full Frost.
F3, just in your justification, should it be something that should be reviewed in the near future? Public comment.
Okay, we do have one public speaker.
Kate Smith. Go. It's not working.
The only way you're going to reduce legal fees is by operating your school district within the laws. I'm sorry, but you know nothing about this situation. And in one way, seeing as how I was going to go over the fact that I suffer permanent neurological brain damage from what was done to me through your taxpayer-paid lawyers. I had to cash out $1.2 million in stock. And then I submitted to you, just last year, I submitted it again, a letter from the top lawyer in the United States in special ed, Maureen Graves. She wrote 10 pages to the IRS to try and explain why I had to cash out the $1.2 million. I still ended up having to pay $350,000 in capital gains tax. So I want you to know that there used to be a time when you only had one lawyer for special ed, and all the fees were not paid by this district. They were paid by the SELPA because Marcia McClish was in charge of the SELPA, and Sharon Watt had a salary of $200,000 to do her malicious prosecution and persecution
15
of
seconds,
parents.
Kate.
God help us. But I'm glad we've got something that we can now focus on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
At this point, we will move on to item H.
I don't have it.
She had the multiple ones.
Yeah, but it wasn't on there.
You can go ahead and speak.
No, what this district and its attorneys have done to Kate Smith is really criminal. I wanted to express my concern about the recommendation that Griffith and Thornburg and Mr. Price now take over overseeing the other attorneys. There's a real concern here. Griffith and Thornburg and Mr. Price already represent Carpinteria School District, the SELPA, the JPA, the County Office of Ed, and I don't know how many other school districts in this county. I think Mr. Price needs to come clean to the public on how many other school districts his law firm, Griffith and Thornburg, represents. I ran into a situation myself where I was representing a student who was being expelled and was trying to appeal that expulsion to the County Office of Ed, and I had Mr. Price representing not only Carpinteria School District, but the County Office of Ed board that was hearing the case, and he was refusing to pass along information to the board that would have been helpful to the student. When I pointed out the conflict of interest, he said, oh, well, there's another attorney that's going to be hearing that's going to be dealing with the appeal hearing anyway. And that's, I think, to have Griffith and Thornburg representing all of these school districts, including the County Office of Ed, this is a sick and dangerous and intimidating situation. School districts are highly dependent on the County Office of Ed for funds and services. Griffith and Thornburg should not be representing all these school districts and the County Office of Ed. This is like a final totalitarian control now to have Griffith and Thornburg oversee all the attorneys at Santa Barbara School District also, so that the County Office of Ed now can be a totalitarian system. You guys really need to take a closer look at this. Also Griffith and Thornburg, also if they're going to be representing Santa Barbara School District, needs to be not representing other clients who have possible claims against or issues of any kind with the Santa Barbara School District, and I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that they are having those kind of clients in a conflict of interest, and they need to come clean with that too. And for instance, regarding how these monies are being spent, just last week I was in a conference where the administration was, I had filed a simple uniform complaint process complaint about a student being reported to law enforcement when they shouldn't have been, a special ed student who was having just obvious and symptoms of a disability that the school was well aware of and was quite used to. They wanted to get rid of him and reported him to the police. The district wanted to have their attorney do the investigation for this simple uniform complaint. And it was only after I was very vehement that the administration needs to investigate the complaints that people made of that people and parents make of violations. The administration
Can
is
you
the
wrap
one
up?
that's responsible for these kids.
Thank
The
you, Mrs.
attorneys
Renard.
have no responsibility to the kids. The kids are not their clients.
Mrs. Renard, time's up. Okay. We had already taken care of item G, which was a return to the consent items. Item H, coming events. We certainly have a number of open houses coming up that we've. Yes, and we have a special meeting this Thursday at 6 o'clock to talk about the unaudited actuals and to deal with the personnel item. I, board comments and correspondence. J, future agenda items. All right. Yes.
The Santa Barbara Education Foundation has an event that conflicts with our December 8 meeting. I'll be coming to you at a later point asking if you could move that to something like December 15. There's a limited window of possibilities when we could have a meeting and could move that meeting. It benefits the district because it's a Michael McDonald concert and it's a fundraising event on their part. It would also recognize people in the community, and one thing that they are recognizing is the Cesar Chavez Leadership Club or Leadership Institute that we know about at Santa Barbara Junior High that was started by Pete Rellis and the fine work that's being continued by people there.
Thank you. All right. Well, with no objection from my board, this meeting is now adjourned.